The hospital corridor exploded into motion the moment the stretcher burst through the swinging doors. Staff scattered out of the way, shoes screeching against the polished floor as the gurney barreled forward. Overhead alarms screamed, sharp, shrill warnings that drilled into Walter's skull and refused to let go. Annabelle lay still on the stretcher, her breathing shallow, her skin pale. A nurse pressed both hands to her side, trying to slow the bleeding. Her gown was soaked. The sheet beneath her was soaked. And Walter was covered in that same blood. He stumbled alongside the stretcher, barely able to keep his balance, his hands trembling as if his entire nervous system had shattered. His breath tore in and out in broken fragments. The world twisted in front of him as though the walls themselves were collapsing. Pressure is dropping. Call, Ob. Now. We're losing fetal movement. Those words hit him harder than any blow ever had. A hand grabbed Walter's shoulder. Sir, you need to step back. Don't touch me, he snapped, voice cracking violently. I'm staying with her. His reaction wasn't anger. It was raw, bone-deep terror. The gurney hit a corner too sharply, and Annabelle's arm slid off the side. Walter grabbed her hand instantly, gripping her cold fingers like a lifeline. Stay with me, he begged. Please, stay with me. Don't let go. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Another alarm wailed. A red light flashed above the next doorway. Baby's heartbeat is dropping. Walter gasped like someone had punched every bit of air from his lungs. No, please. His voice was barely audible. He sounded like a man watching the ground collapse under his feet. Two nurses stepped in front of him again as the team veered toward the surgical suite. Sir, you cannot go in there. You don't understand, Walter choked out. That's my family. But the doors slammed shut anyway, swallowing Annabelle whole, leaving him in the hallway with her blood still warm on his hands. For a moment he stood there frozen, staring at the window and the door like he could force it open with will alone. Doctors and nurses rushed inside, their shadows moving with frantic urgency. His chest tightened. His heartbeat pounded in his throat. His breath wouldn't come. Don't take her. His forehead leaned against the doorframe. Please, don't take them from me. His knees buckled. He didn't feel the floor when he hit it. But he heard a voice. Mr. Fisher. A nurse knelt in front of him, breathless from running. Her hands were shaking too. She was holding something small, wrapped tightly in a towel. The air around Walter stilled. No alarms, no shouting, no footsteps, just silence. Mr. Fisher, she repeated softly. Your baby. The bundle twitched, barely. Walter's face crumpled. The nurse's eyes softened. He's here, but he's not breathing yet. Walter reached with unsteady hands. The nurse placed the tiny, silent newborn into his arms. Walter's body nearly folded around the child, as though he were shielding him from every danger in the world. The baby's skin was still damp. His chest wasn't rising. Walter's lip trembled. Please, he whispered, voice breaking. Please don't take him from me. I can't lose both. His tears fell onto the baby's forehead. A doctor rushed toward them. Bring him, she ordered. Walter rose to his feet too fast, stumbling forward as if driven by something outside himself. He moved like a man refusing to let fate drag him down. He clung to the baby even as his legs failed him. Give him here, sir, the doctor instructed. Walter hesitated. Just a second, just long enough to press one trembling kiss against his newborn son's forehead. Fight, he whispered. A nurse gently pried the baby from his arms. The doctor carried the tiny body toward the neonatal station. Walter's knees gave out again. He hit the cold floor hard, palms splayed, eyes unfocused, breath shaking in broken bursts. Every sound around him blurred into nothing but distant echoes. He whispered a single sentence, the truth tearing from somewhere deep inside him. I only wanted a child, not this, not pain, not fear, not love. His voice disappeared into the hallway, but he stayed there, hunched over, blood on his shirt, hope clinging to shreds, because he couldn't bring himself to move another inch away from the two lives being fought for on both sides of the wall. The hallway finally quieted. The alarms kept their rhythm somewhere in the distance, but around Walter, everything settled into a heavy stillness. Nurses and doctors rushed past him, but it was as if he'd stepped out of his own body. His hands rested uselessly on his knees, still stained with Annabelle's blood. His breathing trembled. His eyes refused to blink. He was frozen there on the cold tile floor, unable to stand, unable to think, unable to pull himself away from the double doors that separated him from the two people he loved most, even if he had never admitted it out loud. Someone walked by and paused, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Sir, we're doing everything we can for her." Walter nodded without looking up. He didn't trust his voice, not when everything inside him felt like it was splitting apart. He lowered his head, closing his eyes. For a moment there were no monitors, no medical staff, no chaos, just his own voice, quiet and breaking. "I only wanted a child, not all this. I didn't plan for love, I didn't plan for fear, I didn't plan to care this much." His breath quivered. "I didn't plan to lose her." The truth hit him so hard he pressed his palms to his eyes as if he could shut it out. But the truth stayed. It burned. A nurse hurried past carrying equipment. A doctor shouted new orders down the hallway. Doors swung open and shut. Somewhere, someone called his name, but it felt faint, muffled. He was slipping into memories he hadn't touched in months. Memories of how everything started. Memories of a night he thought would fade. Memories of a woman he never expected to see again. His chest rose and fell unevenly as the world around him blurred. The hospital walls softened. The fluorescent overhead lights faded into something warmer. The sounds shifted, alarms fading into jazz notes drifting across a dim Chicago lounge. His mind pulled him backward, dragging him through time whether he wanted it or not. He could almost smell the oaken bourbon. He could almost hear the low hum of conversations blending with saxophone chords. He could almost see the woman in the burgundy dress who walked right into his life when he least expected it. The night that changed everything came back to him with sharp clarity. He lifted his head, staring at nothing, whispering, "Let me go back. Let me see how it all began." The flashback pulled him under completely, a tide he could no longer fight. Chicago, 11 months earlier. The lounge sat tucked between two tall buildings in the River North District. Its windows glowed with warm amber light spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, a jazz trio played a soft rhythm, the kind that wrapped itself around the room and soothed tired hearts. Walter stepped inside that night carrying disappointment heavy on his shoulders. He'd had money. He'd had success. He'd had hopes. But the call he'd received earlier had taken all of that and crushed it in one move. Across the room, seated alone with a half-finished glass of wine, was a woman wearing a burgundy dress. She held herself upright, chin high, but her eyes told a different story, one of hurt, betrayal, and quiet strength. He didn't know her name then. He didn't know her story. All he knew was that when their eyes met, something shifted inside him, and neither of them would ever be the same. Chicago was restless that night, not loud, not chaotic, just restless in the way. A big city feels when everyone carries a private battle behind their steady stride. The lounge Walter stepped into offered a temporary escape from all that. Low lights, warm hues, soft jazz filling the room like a comforting blanket, a small sanctuary for bruised hearts. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had planned to head straight home, pour a drink, and pretend everything was fine. But the call he'd taken hours earlier had left a crack in his composure. His ex, the woman who'd kept him dangling between hope and disappointment, was engaged to someone else. After months of pretending she wasn't ready for anything serious, he came to the lounge because anger wasn't his style. Numbness was. He chose a corner booth far from the stage, the glass of bourbon in front of him untouched. He wasn't drinking, he was hiding, or trying to. Across the room, Annabelle sat at the bar with a look that matched his own, a heart freshly wounded. Her burgundy dress hugged her in a way that suggested she'd dressed for an occasion, but the slump in her shoulders betrayed that something had gone terribly wrong. She tapped the rim of her wine glass. Once, twice, not from impatience, from pain she was trying to steady. Her fiancé had broken off their engagement earlier that evening, not face to face, not even with a phone call, a text message, cold, thoughtless, cowardly. She had stared at that message for nearly 10 minutes before her body even reacted. When the shock wore off, she'd grabbed her coat and told herself she wouldn't cry indoors. Pride wouldn't let her. So here she was, fighting not to fall apart while the jazz trio played a slow tune that felt a little too honest. Walter noticed her before she noticed him. He couldn't figure out what drew his attention, maybe the way she blinked hard, to keep her eyes dry, or how her posture kept shifting between strength and hurt. Something about her felt familiar, even though they'd never met. She wasn't staring at her phone. She wasn't scanning the room. She was simply trying to breathe through the blow she'd been dealt. That's when she looked up, just for a second, and her gaze landed on Walter's. A moment of recognition passed between them. Not recognition of faces, but recognition of pain. He didn't look away. Neither did she. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't curiosity. It was two people silently acknowledging, "I see you're hurt. I understand it." Annabelle hesitated only a moment before picking up her wine glass and walking toward him. Walter blinked, surprised. She stopped in front of his booth, steadying herself. "Do you mind if I sit here?" she asked, her voice soft but controlled. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Please." She slid into the booth, took a breath, and offered a tiny attempt at a smile. "You look like someone who had a bad night," she said. He let out a short exhale, not quite a laugh. "You could say that." "Me too," she murmured. They didn't ask each other for details. Not yet. Pain has a way of making people speak slowly. Walter finally lifted his glass, taking a small sip just to anchor himself. He noticed the slight tremor in Annabelle's hands when she took a sip of her wine. For a moment, neither said a word. Silence didn't feel awkward. It felt like the only thing either of them could manage. Walter broke it gently. "I'm Walter." She nodded once. "Annabelle." Her voice carried a quiet strength, even though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. They exchanged small, simple truths. Not the whole story, just the pieces that slipped out when two hurting people sit close and barriers soften. "My relationship ended today," she confessed, her tone steady but fragile. "I'm sorry," Walter replied, and he meant it fully. "What about you?" she asked. Walter stared at his glass before answering. "Someone I cared about, moved on." Annabelle swallowed lightly. "That hurts more than people admit." "You're right," he said softly. Another silence followed, but this time it brought them closer. The jazz played a warm melody. A couple danced slowly by the stage. The world kept moving, unaware of the two strangers sharing a booth and unexpectedly healing each other. Annabelle looked at Walter again, really looked, and something in her expression eased. "You don't seem like someone who gives up easily," she said. "Tonight made it feel like I should," Walter answered. Annabelle's eyes softened. "I get that. But sometimes life breaks us just to show us who we can be on the other side." Walter let those words settle in his chest. He hadn't expected wisdom from a stranger. He hadn't expected anything, really. But Annabelle had just said the first thing all night that made his heart shift. The kind of shift that rewrites the rest of a person's life. The jazz trio shifted into a mellow tune, the kind that invited confession without asking for it. Annabelle rested her fingertips on the edge of her glass, turning it slowly as if waiting for her nerves to settle. Walter watched her with quiet curiosity, not prying, just present. She glanced at him. "Do you ever feel like life waits until you finally relax, then hits you with something you never saw coming?" Walter's eyes lifted. "That's exactly how today felt." "Mine too," she whispered. The way she said it made him straighten. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just honest. Walter leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the polished table. "What happened?" he asked gently. Annabelle breathed through her nose, trying to keep composure. "I was supposed to celebrate tonight, a milestone. My fiancé and I were planning our wedding." Walter blinked. "You were engaged?" She nodded once. "Was..." Her voice tightened. "He ended it this afternoon. By text." Walter's jaw tensed. "By text? After planning a future with you?" Her shoulders rose and fell. "I guess he found an easier option, one he didn't have to grow with or sacrifice for." "That's cowardly," Walter said without hesitation. Annabelle didn't disagree. She lifted her glass again, then lowered it before drinking. "I'm not crying over him. I'm crying over the time I wasted believing he was who I needed." Walter studied her with a slow inhale. Not pity, recognition. "I wasted time too," Walter said quietly. "Someone I cared about walked away like I was just a placeholder." Annabelle swiveled toward him, brows raised but eyes soft. "I didn't expect that from you." "Why not?" "You look like a man who's used to getting what he wants." Walter huffed a breath, close to a laugh, but too tired for the full version. "I'm good at business, Annabelle. Not love. That's where I keep losing." Their eyes held. Not flirtation. Truth meeting truth. Annabelle shifted closer, folding her hands on the table. "What did she say to you?" That she wasn't ready for commitment, he replied, voice low. But she got engaged to someone else right after. Annabelle inhaled sharply. So she just didn't want commitment with you. Walter swallowed. Exactly. Silence settled again, this time heavier but strangely comforting. Annabelle leaned back, exhaling long. You know what hurts most? She said, softly. It wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that I ignored the signs. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that I just needed to be patient. Walter nodded slowly. You didn't want to lose what you'd invested in. Annabelle let out a quiet, pained laugh. Exactly. I've always been the girl who held everything together, at home, at work, in relationships. And now, I'm sitting in a bar trying not to fall apart. Walter's gaze softened. He didn't interrupt her, didn't try to fix it. He just listened, truly listened, in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Annabelle tilted her head. What about you? Why does it hurt so much? Walter stared at the table for a moment, then lifted his eyes to hers. Because I thought I finally chose someone who saw me, he admitted. Not the money, not the success, just me. Annabelle felt her chest tighten with compassion. Someone who made you feel safe. Yes, Annabelle breathed out softly. I understand that better than you think. Their eyes lingered, holding something fragile between them, a connection neither expected but both welcomed in that moment. A waiter passed by, asking if they wanted another drink. Annabelle nodded. Walter did too. 2 more glasses arrived, glinting under the dim lights. You know what I told myself walking in here? Annabelle asked, swirling her wine. What? That I wouldn't cry inside a bar. My pride wouldn't let me. Walter smiled gently. You've held it together better than I would have. Oh, trust me, she said, tapping her chest. The tears are right here. I'm just refusing to give the room a show. Walter laughed softly. Fair enough. Annabelle hesitated before asking, Why did you come here? Walter took a slow breath. To be around people without having to talk. Silence hurts less when there's noise around you. Annabelle's lips tugged upward. That's surprisingly relatable. A small pause, then she leaned closer, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Do you feel? Her voice lowered. Like love has skipped over you, like you gave it everything, but it never stayed. Walter's throat tightened. Yes, he whispered. Annabelle nodded, tears threatening. Me too. They sat like that for a long moment, not speaking, not explaining, just 2 people who finally felt seen. Walter traced the rim of his glass. How long were you with him? 4 years. Walter blinked. 4 years? And he ended it by text. Annabelle lifted one shoulder. People show their true character when they're not getting their way. Walter tilted his head. You deserved better. Annabelle looked down. I thought so too. Until tonight. Walter reached across the table and rested his hand lightly over hers. Not possessive, not forward, just steady. She didn't pull away. Her fingers even curled slightly toward his. Annabelle whispered, Thank you. Oh, for what? For listening like you mean it. Walter's voice gentled. It's easy to listen to someone who speaks from the heart. Annabelle held his gaze. You don't know me, she murmured. But it feels like you do. You don't know me either, Walter replied. But you're the first person I've spoken to all day who didn't make me feel tired. The band shifted into a slow, soulful tune, the kind that fills the room with warmth and longing. Annabelle looked toward the stage and breathed in the music. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sound wash over her. When she opened them again, Walter was still watching her. Not staring, not assessing, just present. Walter, she said softly, do you want to walk outside for a bit? His brows lifted in surprise. With you? Annabelle nodded once, decisive. Just air. I need to clear my head. Then, after a beat, and I'd like the company. Walter didn't hesitate. He stood and offered his hand. Annabelle placed her hand in his. Something shifted right then. Something neither of them planned for. Something neither of them could undo. They walked out of the lounge together, 2 wounded hearts stepping into the night, searching for anything that felt real. The night air outside the lounge held a quiet calm. Cars rolled by with soft hums, streetlights glowed in warm halos, and a gentle breeze brushed against Annabelle's shoulders as she stepped out with Walter beside her. She drew in a deep breath. Finally, Air. Walter slipped his hands into his pockets. You okay? No, she admitted. But I'm trying. He nodded. Trying is enough tonight. They walked slowly down the sidewalk, their steps falling into an easy rhythm. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It felt like a relief. Neither of them had to pretend or force conversation. After a moment, Annabelle asked softly, Do you ever wonder if we choose the wrong people? Or if the wrong people choose us? Walter thought about that. Maybe both. She gave a tired laugh. Too honest. Life's been too honest with you today, he replied. You're allowed to be. Annabelle looked at him, studying the profile of his face, the sharp jaw, the tired eyes, the sincerity that she wasn't expecting from a stranger. You listen in a way most people don't. I appreciate when someone actually speaks from their heart, Walter said. Annabelle hugged her arms around herself. I haven't spoken from my heart in a long time. Tonight might be the first time in a while, Walter offered gently. She slowed to a stop. It feels that way. Walter paused beside her. Annabelle. When she looked at him, her eyes glistened just a bit, not with tears, but with a quiet loneliness. It hurts, she whispered. Not just the breakup. All of it. Carrying everything alone all the time. Walter stepped closer, voice soft. You don't have to pretend with me. Something in her resolve flickered, a fragile reminder that she didn't have to be the strong one every second. Can we walk somewhere quieter? She asked. Anywhere you want. They ended up near the hotel next door, its entrance glowing in warm gold tones. People in suits walked in and out, luggage rolling behind them. Annabelle paused again, her heartbeat picking up. Walter studied her face. Do you want to go back inside the lounge? Her answer was quiet. No. Do you want to go home? He asked gently. She shook her head. I can't be alone right now. Not tonight. Walter didn't rush her. Didn't assume. He waited. Annabelle took a small step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want anything complicated. I just want to feel safe tonight. Walter swallowed. Annabelle, if we go inside that hotel, I'm not asking for anything physical, she said firmly but softly. I'm asking for presence, for company, for someone to just be there. She wasn't seeking escape. She wasn't seeking distraction. She was seeking a moment where she didn't have to pretend she was okay. Walter nodded slowly. If we go in, I'll follow your lead. No pressure, no expectations, just care. Annabelle's shoulders relaxed, just barely. Thank you, she whispered. They walked inside together. The lobby light brushed against their faces, giving everything a warm, gentle glow. Guests passed by with busy strides, but for Walter and Annabelle, the world had narrowed to something small and tender. He booked a room quietly, not wanting to draw attention. When the elevator doors closed behind them, Annabelle let out a trembling breath she'd been holding since the lounge. Walter didn't touch her, didn't crowd her. He simply stood nearby, giving her space while letting her know he wasn't going anywhere. When they reached the room, Annabelle stepped in first. She set her purse down slowly, her hands shaking. Walter closed the door behind them and waited. For a long moment she just stood there, breathing, processing, trying to keep the tears she refused to shed. Walter spoke gently. Do you want to sit? She nodded. He offered his hand without rushing her. She took it. They sat on the edge of the bed together. Annabelle leaned into him, resting her forehead against his shoulder. Not romantic, not seductive, just human. Walter wrapped an arm around her shoulders carefully, the way someone handles something precious. She whispered, I don't usually let anyone see me like this. Me either, he murmured. A single tear slid down her cheek. He brushed it away with the back of his finger, slow and comforting. Annabelle, he said softly, you're allowed to let go tonight. She closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. Just for a moment. He eased her into his arms as she let the weight fall off her spine. They sat like that for a long time. No words, no pressure, just shared warmth. Eventually, she lifted her head and looked at him with a tenderness that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. Walter. He met her gaze, steady and patient. She leaned forward, kissing him gently, not out of desire, but out of gratitude, connection, and the need to feel something real. He kissed her back with the same softness. The kiss deepened only when she guided it there. Every move slow, every touch careful. The night that followed wasn't wild or reckless. It was tender, intentional. two lonely hearts choosing each other for comfort, for healing, for a moment of real connection in a world that hurt them both. Hours later, as the city's lights dimmed and the early morning hues touched the sky, Annabelle stirred beside him. She watched him sleep, peaceful, unaware, steady. Her heart tugged painfully. She dressed quietly, trying not to wake him. She paused at the door. She whispered, "Thank you for being kind," even though she knew he couldn't hear it. Then she slipped out of the room, leaving nothing behind but the imprint of a night that neither of them would ever forget. Sunlight pushed through the curtain cracks in narrow streaks, falling across Walter's face. He stirred, slow and warm, stretching slightly before his eyes blinked open. For a brief moment, he was caught between the dreamlike softness of the night before and the quiet reality of morning. He reached out instinctively toward the other side of the bed. Empty. His hand touched cool sheets. Walter frowned, sitting up, scanning the room. Her shoes were gone. Her bag. The faint trace of her perfume lingered in the air, but she herself had vanished, quiet as a whisper. He ran a hand over his face. "Annabelle." Silence answered. He stood, pacing a few steps before stopping at the window. The city below moved on without hesitation. Cars, people, distant horns, while he stood in a room that suddenly felt too quiet. He replayed the night. Her laugh. Her trembling hands. Her honesty. Her kiss. The gentleness they shared. Something he hadn't felt in years, if ever. He hadn't expected her to stay forever. But he'd hoped she'd stay long enough to say goodbye. He noticed a small indentation on the pillow where her head had rested. Something pulled at him. Something he didn't want to name yet. He dressed quickly, his mind racing. Should he try to find her? Would that be overstepping? Would she even want to see him again? Walter stepped into the hallway, took the elevator down, and walked out into the crisp Chicago morning. The breeze cooled his face, but it didn't settle the uneasy feeling building inside him. He returned to the lounge from the night before. It was closed, chairs turned upside down, lights off. He checked the street. Nothing. He paced for a few seconds, then rubbed the back of his neck. "Where did you go?" It wasn't desperation. It was something quieter. A tug he couldn't explain. He headed home but couldn't shake her from his thoughts. Annabelle stood in her small kitchen later that morning, hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea. Her eyes were tired, her posture stiff, her emotions still raw. She had showered, changed into fresh scrubs, tied her curls back, but none of it washed away the memory of last night. She thought about Walter's voice when he listened, the way he didn't rush her, how his presence steadied her breaking heart, how he held her like she was something fragile and worthy of care. She closed her eyes and pressed a hand to her chest, exhaling shakily. "What did I do?" she whispered. It wasn't regret. It was fear. The fear of letting anyone in again after losing so much. Her phone buzzed. She jumped. A message from a colleague. "You're on call tonight, don't forget." She responded quickly and set the phone down, but her thoughts drifted back to Walter anyway. She didn't tell herself it was a mistake. She didn't shame herself. She just couldn't figure out why a stranger's touch had felt like the first genuine comfort she'd had in months. Annabelle walked to the window and stared out at the city. Maybe it was just one night, she told herself softly. But her heart gave a small ache that said otherwise. Walter spent the morning pacing his penthouse office. He tried reading emails. He tried taking calls. He tried focusing on numbers, strategies, contracts, everything he usually found grounding. But every attempt failed. Every task blurred. Every thought drifted back to her. He replayed her laughter, her confessions, the bravery in her honesty, the sadness she tried to swallow, and the moment she leaned into him as if she'd been holding her breath for days. He sat heavily on the couch, running a hand through his hair. "Why can't I get you out of my head?" he murmured. He wasn't a man who lingered. He wasn't a man who chased. But this felt different, unexpected, unshakable. He pulled out his phone, staring at the blank screen. He didn't have her number, didn't know her last name, didn't know where she lived or worked. He only knew her first name. And somehow, that felt like too little and too much at the same time. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant about an upcoming board meeting. He ignored it. Instead, he whispered to himself, "I need to see her again." He didn't know why. He just knew he would regret it if he didn't try. Hours later, Annabelle walked through the hospital corridors. immersed in her shift. But even as she cared for patients, gave updates and charted notes, her mind tugged back to that quiet hotel room, to the man with the tired eyes and gentle hands, to the stranger who made her feel less alone. She checked the monitors on one patient, made a note, and stepped aside. A co-worker approached. "Rough day?" Annabelle managed a small smile. "More like a rough night." Her co-worker nodded sympathetically and walked away. Annabelle exhaled. When she finally took her break, she pulled out her phone and stared at the blank message screen. She didn't have his number either. She whispered to herself, maybe it's better this way. But her eyes softened. The truth was, she didn't believe that. Not one bit. Walter sat on the edge of his couch, elbows planted on his knees, eyes fixed on the dark screen of his phone. Hours had passed since he'd woken up in that empty hotel room. Hours, and he still couldn't convince himself to move on, as if the night hadn't meant anything. She walked away, he muttered to himself. But that doesn't mean the story ends there. His mind replayed the way she'd said goodbye without words. Not out of indifference, not out of regret, out of fear. He could sense it now more clearly than ever. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply. There has to be a way to reach her. Then it hit him. Her name, Annabelle. She'd told him she worked in medicine, and she had mentioned a demanding schedule. Her hospital, he had heard it in passing when she said she'd be on call tonight. He moved to his desk, opened his laptop, and typed her name into the hospital's staff directory. For a moment, he worried. What if she wasn't there? What if he'd misheard? But then the screen loaded. Dr. Annabelle Morris, trauma surgery. A small photo of her appeared beside the listing, confident, professional, focused. A stark contrast to the vulnerable woman he had held hours earlier. Walter's breath tightened in his chest when he saw her email address underneath. He clicked on the message field. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "What do I even say?" he whispered. He typed, deleted, typed again, deleted again. Everything sounded either too eager or too cold. He wanted neither. Finally, after several false starts, he wrote, "It's Walter. I just wanted to say, I haven't stopped thinking about you. I hope you made it home safely." Simple, honest, not demanding. He stared at the words for a long moment, unsure whether pressing send was a mistake or the only right choice he had. His thumb hovered. His heart pounded. Send. The message flew off into the unknown. Walter sat back, breath stuck in his chest. He closed the laptop slowly. "Please reply," he whispered. Annabelle found a brief quiet moment in the staff lounge. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. She sank into a chair, exhaustion settling over her like a heavy coat she couldn't shrug off. She opened her phone absent-mindedly. Emails, schedules, alerts. Then her breath caught. A new message, from an unfamiliar address, but the name. Walter. Her heart thudded once, sharply. Her thumb shook slightly as she tapped the message open. "It's Walter. I just wanted to say, I haven't stopped thinking about you. I hope you made it home safely." Annabelle stared at the screen. Her throat tightened. He reached out. He cared enough to find her. He didn't disappear like everyone else had in her past. It took her a few moments before she found her voice, even in written form. But when she did, the answer flowed naturally. She typed, "Took you long enough. I made it home safely. Thank you. Last night meant more than you know." She hesitated, rereading her words, then pressed send. For the first time since her engagement ended, she felt a small lift inside her chest. Something warm, something gentle. Not hope exactly, but something close. Walter's phone buzzed instantly. His pulse jumped. He opened her reply. "Took you long enough." He smiled, a real one that reached his eyes. He read the rest slowly. "Last night meant more than you know." He leaned back in his chair, letting the sentence settle over him. He typed again. "I didn't want to overwhelm you, but I want to talk again. Whenever you're ready." He hovered over send only for a second this time. Annabelle replied almost immediately. "I'm ready now." Walter closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in. Relief settled into his bones. Two people who were never supposed to meet again. Two people who walked away silently, now reaching back toward each other without hesitation. What began as a single night was shifting into something deeper, something neither of them had planned for. Something that would change everything. The rest of the night at the hospital passed slowly for Annabelle, though her mind wasn't focused on the usual concerns. During breaks, she checked her phone, exchanging messages with him. Short messages at first, then longer ones, then ones that made them smile at their screens. Walter asked how her shift was going. Annabelle teased him for his predictable replies. He sent a photo of the untouched bourbon from the night before with the caption, "Still not drinking it." She replied, "Good, you don't need it." Their banter flowed like they'd known each other longer than one night. It was effortless, unexpected, quietly intoxicating. By the time her shift ended, they had exchanged dozens of messages, enough to make her heart feel lighter, steady in a new way. She walked to her car slowly, almost reluctantly, because she didn't want the conversation to end. Walter messaged one more time, "Sleep well, Annabelle." She smiled softly and typed, "You too, Walter. Talk tomorrow." His answer came in seconds. "Absolutely." Annabelle held the phone against her chest for a moment, letting out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Something had begun. Something neither of them fully understood yet. Something neither of them wanted to end. The next day began with a message from Walter. "Good morning. Did you get any rest?" Annabelle smiled down at her phone as she sat in her car before heading into the hospital. "A little you? Barely. My mind wouldn't shut off." "About what?" she asked. A pause before his reply came. "You." Her heart gave a small, unexpected tug. That evening, after their shift and work-filled days, Annabelle texted, "Are you free?" Walter didn't even hesitate. "Call me." Annabelle tapped the phone icon, and when he answered, his voice carried that familiar calm she hadn't realized she needed so much. "Hi," he said softly. She smiled. "Hi." For a moment, neither spoke, not out of awkwardness, but because hearing each other's voices bridged some invisible distance. Walter's voice was quiet. "You sound tired." "I've been tired for a long time," she admitted. "Same," he murmured. Annabelle exhaled. "It feels good to talk to someone and not pretend." "I was thinking the same thing," Walter said. "Usually I have to put on a face, be the strong one, or fix everything. But with you, I don't feel the need to do that." Annabelle leaned back, closing her eyes. "Me too." Their conversation eased into a natural rhythm, steady, honest, unfiltered. As midnight approached, Walter asked quietly, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. What made you choose trauma surgery?" Annabelle's voice softened. "My mother. She raised me alone after my father left. I remember the nights she'd fall asleep on the couch from working double shifts. She always told me to aim higher so I wouldn't have to break myself the way she did." Walter listened carefully. There was no judgment, only understanding. "What happened with your father?" he asked gently. Annabelle hesitated, then sighed. "He left when I was 12, walked out and never looked back. No explanation, no goodbye. I learned early that love isn't guaranteed, even when you give it everything." Walter closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "It's life," she murmured, "but it shapes you, makes you guard your heart before anyone else has the chance to hurt it." Walter swallowed. "That sounds painfully familiar." Annabelle's tone shifted, curious. "Why?" "Because I grew up thinking success would protect me," Walter said. "If I worked hard enough, built enough, earned enough, no one could hurt me. And," she whispered. "It didn't work," he said quietly. Annabelle didn't speak for a moment. Then she whispered, "It's strange how two very different people can end up carrying the same kind of loneliness." Their conversation flowed into the early hours. They talked about childhood, about expectations, about fear, about the moments in life that left bruises no one else could see. For the first time in a long time, Walter felt understood by someone he wasn't trying to impress, and Annabelle felt seen by someone who didn't expect her to be perfect. When the sky began to lighten, Annabelle whispered, "Walter?" "Yes?" "I like talking to you." Walter's voice warmed. "I like talking to you too." Their calls became routine. Some nights they talked for hours. Other nights they fell asleep on the phone without realizing it. Walter found himself smiling at his screen the moment her name appeared. Annabelle found comfort in hearing his voice even after the hardest days at the hospital. Every night drew them closer, stitching two separate worlds into a quiet thread neither wanted to cut. One late evening, after another long call filled with laughter and softness, Annabelle sensed something weighing on him. "Walter, what's on your mind?" He hesitated. She could hear it in the silence. Walter, she pressed gently. He took a slow breath. There's something I need to tell you. Annabelle straightened. Okay. It's personal. So is everything we've talked about, she said softly. Walter exhaled. I'm planning to have a child, through a surrogate. Annabelle didn't respond immediately. Her pulse skipped. Oh, she whispered. I decided months ago, Walter continued. Before I met you. Before the night at the lounge. Before all this. Annabelle swallowed hard. And you still plan to go through with it? Yes. Her stomach tightened. Why? Because I'm tired of waiting to be chosen, he said quietly. I always wanted a family. I'm getting older, and after everything I've lost in relationships, I decided I couldn't keep gambling my heart on people walking away. Annabelle stared at the wall, blinking through the sting in her eyes. He wasn't saying this to push her away. He wasn't saying it out of coldness, but it still hit her with quiet force. You don't have to explain, she whispered. I want to, Walter replied. I'm telling you because it feels wrong to hide it from you. You deserve honesty. Annabelle nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I appreciate that. Silence stretched between them, not cold, but complicated. Are you upset? He asked. No, she lied softly. I'm just processing. Walter's voice gentled. I understand. Annabelle closed her eyes. A part of her wanted to say, what about us? Another part whispered, there is no us. Not yet. Not officially. Not in the way she secretly wished for. So she simply said, I'm glad you told me. Walter replied quietly. I hope it doesn't change how you talk to me. It won't, she said, her voice steady but heart trembling. It just makes me think about things I haven't let myself think about. Like what? He asked. She hesitated. Like how fast I'm getting attached. Walter's breath caught. Annabelle. But she cut him off softly. Not in a bad way, just unexpectedly. Walter's voice was barely a whisper when he answered. I know exactly how that feels. Over the next few weeks, their connection took on a life of its own. Some nights they texted until dawn. Some nights they stayed on the phone until one of them dozed off mid-sentence. Some nights Walter caught himself smiling at nothing but the sound of her laugh. And some nights Annabelle sat at her kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, wondering how a man she barely knew was becoming the one person she didn't want to lose. The surrogacy revelation lingered between them, but neither mentioned it again. Walter didn't want to push her. Annabelle didn't want to seem fragile. But the truth lived quietly in both of their hearts. They were falling for each other, fast, unexpectedly, dangerously. One evening, Annabelle finished a long shift and walked toward the staff lounge. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, but her thoughts circled the same place. Walter. She slid into a seat and rubbed her temples. I should pull back. I should protect myself. I barely know him. Why does he feel so familiar? Why does he feel so safe? Her mother's old warnings echoed faintly. Be careful who you let close. Not everyone stays. Annabelle sighed. She had stayed strong her entire life. Independent, controlled, guarded, but Walter had slipped through her defenses simply by being gentle. Her phone buzzed. Walter, are you off work? She stared at the message for a full minute before responding. Annabelle, just finished. Another buzz came instantly. Walter, can I call you? Annabelle exhaled, typing slowly. Yes. Seconds later, the phone rang. She answered softly. Hey, you sound tired, Walter said. I'm alive. That's enough for today. Walter chuckled lightly. Rough shift? Rough everything. Talk to me, he encouraged. Annabelle hesitated. They promoted someone over me, she said finally. Someone I helped train. I should be happy for them, but I don't know, it stung. Walter's voice dropped, warm and steady. I'm sorry. That isn't fair. It's life, she whispered. You deserve more. Annabelle swallowed, the simple validation warming something inside her. Thank you. She heard him breathe on the other end, as if choosing his next words carefully. Annabelle, can I be honest? You should be, she murmured. I think about you all the time. Her heart stilled. He continued softly, even when I'm busy, even when I should be focusing on other things, my mind goes back to you. Annabelle couldn't speak for a moment. Walter, she whispered. I don't want to complicate anything, he said. But I also don't want to pretend I'm not getting attached. Her eyes softened. That makes two of us, she finally admitted. After they ended the call that night, Walter paced his penthouse, restless. He didn't want to sound needy. He didn't want to scare her away. But the truth kept tugging at him. He missed her. He wanted to see her. He wanted the warmth he'd felt that night, not out of desire, but out of connection. He stopped in the middle of his living room, hands on his hips. I need to see her again. The next evening, during another phone call, Walter finally said the words he'd rehearsed 100 times. Annabelle. I'm going to be in Chicago next month for business, he began. She paused. Oh, I want to see you, he said plainly, not by accident, not by chance. I want to see you because I miss you. Her breath hitched. Walter, I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? He asked. Because I'm scared, she admitted. Of this, of us, of how fast it's happening. Walter's voice softened to a whisper. I'm scared too. That doesn't make it easier, she murmured. No, he said gently, but it makes it honest. Annabelle fell silent, torn between instinct and desire. Walter continued, carefully choosing his words. I don't expect anything. I don't want to pressure you. I just want to sit across from you, talk to you, see you smile in person, not just hear it through the phone. The lines stayed quiet long enough for him to grow nervous. Then Annabelle exhaled shakily. Okay, she whispered. I'll see you. Walter closed his eyes, relief flooding through him. Thank you, he breathed. I'm not thanking you yet, she teased softly, voice trembling in a way that told him the decision cost her courage. The next morning, Walter opened his laptop and pulled up his travel calendar. His team had already scheduled meetings in New York and San Francisco. Chicago wasn't on the list. He added it himself. Chicago, 3 days. His assistant emailed quickly. Is this for business or personal? Walter typed back. Both. He'd never blurred those lines before. Not once. Not in his entire career. But for Annabelle. He didn't mind rewriting the rules. Annabelle spent the rest of the week in a strange emotional space, nervous, hopeful, cautious. Her coworkers noticed she was quieter than usual. She tried not to smile at her phone too often. She tried to convince herself she wasn't letting anything go too far. But every time she remembered his voice saying, I miss you, her heart softened again. One evening, while driving home, she whispered to herself, why does it feel like I'm walking towards something I won't be able to handle? The answer came immediately, uninvited. Because you want it. Walter stepped off the plane with more nerves than he cared to admit. He had given board presentations in front of thousands, negotiated deals worth millions, survived. Public failures. But none of those moments made his palms sweat the way this trip did. The sun was setting over O'Hare Airport, painting the horizon in warm orange. He walked through the terminal in a fitted coat, suitcase rolling behind him, but his thoughts weren't on business or meetings. They were on Annabelle. He checked into a quiet downtown hotel, not far from where they'd first met. The room was minimalist, perfect for someone who didn't plan on sleeping much. His phone buzzed. A text from Annabelle. Are you settled? Walter smiled. Just did. Are you still okay to meet tonight? A short pause. Then, yes. Where? Walter exhaled slowly. He could feel his pulse in his neck. There's a restaurant near the river. Quiet, warm, good lighting. I reserved a table for 2. Her reply came almost instantly. Send the address. I'll be there. Annabelle stood in front of her bathroom mirror, palms pressed to the counter. She had been getting ready for 20 minutes but had barely moved. Her mind kept racing. What if it's awkward? What if he regrets coming? What if I'm reading too much into this? What if this becomes something real? That last thought terrified her the most. She picked up a simple pair of earrings, then set them down. Picked them up again. Set them down. She whispered to her reflection. Breathe. You can do this. She eventually chose a navy blouse and fitted pants, elegant, mature, effortless. Something that didn't scream trying too hard, but still made her feel beautiful. When her phone buzzed again with the restaurant address, her stomach fluttered. Okay, she whispered. Here we go. Walter arrived first. Standing outside the restaurant's entrance, a soft breeze rolled off the river, brushing against his coat. He checked his watch. He wasn't early. He was terrified. Then she stepped out of a rideshare, and the world seemed to shift a little. Annabelle walked toward him slowly, the warm glow from the restaurant lights brushing her face. Her navy blouse moved with the breeze, her curls resting gently over her shoulders. Walter's breath hitched, subtle but real. "Hi," Annabelle said quietly, offering a small, nervous smile. Walter's expression softened instantly. "Hi." For a moment, they just looked at each other, taking in the reality of standing, face to face after weeks of nothing but screens and phone calls. He cleared his throat. "You look amazing." Annabelle looked down, hiding a shy smile. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." The air between them warmed at the edges. "Shall we?" Walter asked. She nodded, and he opened the door for her. She stepped inside, and their night began. The restaurant was intimate, low lighting, soft jazz in the background, muted conversations. Their table sat near a window overlooking the river, candles flickering between them. They ordered drinks. They shared quiet glances. They tried small talk first, the flight, the city, work, but it didn't take long for deeper currents to surface. Walter leaned forward slightly. "I was nervous you'd cancel." Annabelle raised a brow. "Nervous? You'd be surprised," he replied. "I don't usually feel this way." Annabelle studied him. "Feel what?" Walter inhaled slowly, like someone matters before they're mine. Annabelle's pulse jumped. "Walter, I'm being honest," he said softly. "Not trying to push you, just telling the truth." Annabelle swallowed. "I didn't cancel because I wanted to see you too." That admission hung in the air like something fragile and precious. The server returned with food, giving them a moment to breathe, but the tension stayed, warm, steady, impossible to ignore. Partway through the meal, Annabelle met his gaze and said quietly, "You're different from what I expected." "How so?" "You listen," she replied. "You pay attention. You make space instead of taking it." Walter nodded once, humbled. "I want to understand you, not overwhelm you." Annabelle held his gaze longer this time. "That means more than you know." Walter's fingers brushed the stem of his glass. He wasn't usually bold with his feelings, but tonight felt too honest to hold anything back. "Annabelle," he said softly, "I came back to Chicago for you. Not business." Her breath caught, tiny, involuntary. "I wanted to see you," Walter continued. "Not because of what happened that night, not because of loneliness, because talking to you feels like the first good thing that's happened in a long time." Annabelle looked down at her food for a moment, then back up at him. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "I didn't think someone like you would ever say something like that to someone like me." Walter frowned gently. "Someone like me? You're successful, established, put together. Meanwhile, I'm—" She exhaled, a woman picking up the pieces of her life. Walter shook his head. "You're strong. You're real. You're everything I didn't even know I needed in a person." Annabelle's eyes softened in a way he'd never seen. Her heart opened a little more. After dinner, they stepped outside into the cool night air again. The river glimmered under streetlights as boats drifted by quietly. Walter walked beside her, their shoulders almost touching. They paused near the railing, looking out at the water. Annabelle whispered, "I'm glad you came." Walter glanced at her. She didn't look away. He stepped an inch closer. Just 1 inch, but enough for her breath to change. "Annabelle," he said softly, "can I?" He didn't finish the question. He didn't need to. Annabelle turned toward him, her eyes warm, uncertain, and full of something she'd been fighting for weeks. "Yes," she breathed. Walter reached up, cupping her cheek gently. No rush, no pressure, just the softest touch. She leaned into his palm. He lowered his forehead to hers, breathing her in. Then he kissed her, slow, warm, with a tenderness that stole her breath. Annabelle's hands rose to his chest, fingers curling slightly. He held her waist lightly, as if afraid she might disappear again. The kiss deepened by inches, not urgency. Their hearts did the rest. When they finally parted, Annabelle whispered, "I wasn't ready for this." Walter rested his forehead against hers. "Neither was I." "But it's happening," she said. He nodded. "Yes, and it scares me," she admitted. "It scares me too." They both breathed out a shaky laugh, not from humor but from truth. There, by the river, in the cool Chicago night, they realized something neither could deny anymore. They weren't in each other's lives by accident. After their kiss by the river, neither moved right away. The air between them felt warm, charged with an honesty neither had shared with anyone in years. Chicago's night breeze brushed past them, soft and quiet, as if giving them space to breathe in what had just happened. Walter brushed his thumb along her cheek. "You want to walk?" Annabelle nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I do." They walked along the river path slowly, their hands brushing occasionally. Each touch sent a quiet spark through both of them, subtle but undeniable. Annabelle found herself stealing glances at him, trying to make sense of how a man she met by accident had become someone she trusted instinctively. Walter noticed every glance, every shift in her breath, every moment she seemed to fight an internal tug of war. He finally broke the silence. "What's going through your mind?" Annabelle exhaled softly. "That maybe I didn't prepare myself for how real this feels." Walter slowed his steps. "Real isn't always bad." "It can be," she murmured. "But it doesn't have to be," he added gently. They reached the entrance of his hotel before she realized it. She stopped, blinking up at the building, then back at him. "Do you want to come up?" Walter asked quietly, no pressure, just an invitation, a question that carried weight. Annabelle's heart thudded. "I don't know." Walter stepped closer, his voice low, warm. "It doesn't have to mean anything complicated tonight. We don't have to decide anything. We can just be together. No expectations." Annabelle stared at him, searching his face for any sign of hidden motives. She found none. Only sincerity, desire held with restraint, patience wrapped in longing. She took a steadying breath. "I want to go with you," she said softly. Walter nodded once, a quiet sigh of relief escaping him. "Come on." The hotel room was dim, lit only by a lamp near the bed. Annabelle stepped inside first, her fingers brushing nervously over her arm. Walter closed the door gently and waited, giving her space. She turned toward him slowly. Their eyes locked. No rush. No pressure. Walter took a step forward, lifting a hand toward her cheek. "Tell me to stop if you need to." She shook her head. "I won't." He kissed her softly at first, giving her room to breathe, room to step back if the moment was too much. But Annabelle wrapped her arms around his neck and drew him closer, deepening the kiss. With a quiet yearning she'd been holding back since he walked into the restaurant. The world outside the room faded. Only their breathing, their warmth, and the steady rise of emotion filled the space between them. Their movements were slow, intentional, not rushed, not careless, but full of tenderness and understanding. It wasn't about lust. It was about connection, about finding comfort in each other's arms after too many nights spent alone. Annabelle rested her forehead against his chest afterward, breathing him in. Walter held her, as if she were something he didn't want to lose, but was afraid to grip too tightly. "You're safe," he whispered into her hair. Annabelle's breath shuddered at the words. For the first time in a long time, she let herself fall asleep wrapped in someone's arms. When Annabelle woke, the room was filled with soft morning light. Walter's arm was around her waist, steady and warm. His breathing was slow, peaceful. She watched him for a moment, the calm expression, the unguarded softness. The man who had listened to her more genuinely than anyone in years. Her chest tightened. "This is dangerous," she whispered to herself. She carefully slipped out from under his arm, sitting at the edge of the bed with her head in her hands. She liked him, more than she planned, more than she allowed herself to, and that terrified her. He wanted a child through surrogacy. He wanted structure, a controlled life, and she was a woman recovering from a broken engagement, a woman who had just crossed a line she wasn't sure her heart could handle again. She stood quietly, gathered her clothes, and dressed with slow, conflicted movements. Walter stirred behind her, voice still groggy. "Annabelle." She froze for a second before turning. "Hey," she whispered. "Go back to sleep." He pushed himself up slightly. "Are you leaving?" She nodded, avoiding his eyes. "Yeah, I have an early shift." Walter rubbed his face, still half asleep. "I can drive you." "That's okay," she said quickly. "I need some air." Walter watched her carefully now, the tension in her voice impossible to miss. "Everything okay?" Annabelle forced a small smile. "Yeah, just tired." He frowned, sensing the walls going up again. "Annabelle, if I did something—" "You didn't," she whispered, grabbing her purse. "Really, I just need to think." He reached for her hand gently. "Can we talk later?" She nodded, but her voice lacked conviction. "Sure." Walter watched her walk toward the door with a sinking feeling in his chest. "Annabelle," he called softly. She paused. "You don't have to run from me." Her breath caught. She didn't turn around. "I'm not running," she whispered, though both of them knew she was. She walked out, the door clicking softly behind her. Walter sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door long after she'd gone. He replayed the night, the morning, the shift in her demeanor. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt by pride. He was worried. Did I push too hard? He whispered to the empty room. He thought about texting her, calling her, running after her. But he also remembered the look in her eyes, the fear, so he waited. He showered slowly, dressed carefully, and headed to his morning meeting. But his mind stayed stuck in that hotel room. He didn't regret a thing. Not the night, not the kiss, not the honesty. But he feared she did. Annabelle sat in her parked car outside the hospital, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. "What is wrong with me?" she whispered. Her mind repeated his words on loop. "You don't have to run from me." But fear had wrapped itself around her ribs, tightening with every breath. "You barely know him. You're falling too fast. You can't go through heartbreak again." She closed her eyes and exhaled shakily. "It's just one night," she told herself. "It doesn't have to mean anything." But her heart answered honestly. It meant everything. Annabelle's shift dragged on longer than usual. Normally she powered through long hours without much thought. But today, her mind wouldn't settle. Walter, their night, his quiet voice in the morning, her own fear. Every image replayed like flashes she couldn't push away. She kept telling herself she needed space, needed control, needed time. But every time her phone buzzed, her heartbeat jumped, and she hated how much she wanted it to be him. During her break, she checked. It was him. "Walter, just checking in. Hope your day's going okay." She stared at the message for a long moment, debating whether to respond. Her mind whispered, "Don't get attached." Her heart whispered, "You already are." She finally typed, "Annabelle, busy shift. I'm okay." Short, unemotional, safe. She put her phone face down and forced herself back to work. Walter read her message twice. "Busy shift. I'm okay." He frowned slightly. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't her usual warmth. He typed, "Call me tonight?" No reply. He forced himself to close the conversation and return to his tasks. But the restlessness wouldn't fade. He replayed her face that morning, the way her eyes avoided his, the tension in her shoulders, the quiet panic she tried to hide. He paced his office. "Don't overthink it," he muttered. "Give her space." He tried. He failed. By evening, he tried again. "Walter, thinking of you." Still nothing. At home, Annabelle curled up on her couch, knees to her chest, a soft blanket draped over her legs. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't move. She wasn't ignoring him out of anger. She wasn't punishing him. She was protecting herself. She whispered to the quiet apartment, "I can't fall in love with someone who has already planned to start a family without me." Her chest tightened. She thought about the surrogacy, about Walter's longing for a child, about his years of heartbreak, his loneliness. "I'm not in his plan," she told herself. "Last night doesn't change that." She finally read the message he sent. "Thinking of you." Her eyes stung. She typed a response, then deleted it. Typed again. Deleted. Finally, she wrote something safe. "Annabelle, long day. We'll talk tomorrow." She sent it quickly before she lost her nerve. When Walter saw her message, his heart dropped just slightly. Not enough to devastate him, but enough to worry him. Long day. "We'll talk tomorrow." He sat back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly against the tabletop. "She's pulling away," he whispered. He didn't blame her. He didn't want to chase her either, not in a way that overwhelmed her. But he cared. More than he should, more than he had planned. He typed once more. "No rush. Rest well." Annabelle didn't reply. The next week unfolded in a quiet rhythm of imbalance. Walter texted. Annabelle replied late. Walter called. Annabelle answered but kept the conversation short. Walter tried to ask if she wanted to meet again. Annabelle dodged the question. Each time Walter gave her space. But the ache grew. Each time Annabelle felt guilt. but the fear grew. Their once effortless connection now felt like walking through a fog. Neither of them said it, but both felt it. Something was shifting. Something was pulling them apart before they had the chance to define anything. One morning, Annabelle stepped into the hospital locker room and caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired, more tired than usual. She brushed it off. Long shifts could do that. But then, her stomach tightened unexpectedly. A wave of nausea hit her, sharp and sudden. She gripped the edge of the counter, waiting for it to pass. "This isn't normal," she whispered. She rinsed her face with cold water, told herself it was stress, told herself she hadn't eaten enough. But the next day, the nausea returned, and the day after that, and the fifth day. Her hands trembled when she realized something else. Her cycle was late. She blinked hard, trying to steady her breathing. "No," she whispered. Her mind began racing. "It's stress. It's exhaustion. It's nothing." But her heart whispered the truth she didn't want to face. Her legs nearly gave out as she sank onto the bench. "Oh my God," she breathed. No, this can't be happening. Yet deep down she knew. She knew exactly what it meant. Annabelle rushed to the nearest drugstore during her break. She moved quickly, head down, barely breathing. She grabbed a pregnancy test. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it at the counter. She got back to the hospital staff restroom, locked the door, and stared at the box in her hands. Her chest tightened. Her throat closed. Her heartbeat thundered. "Walter," she whispered. The name escaped her before she could stop it. She closed her eyes, speaking into the quiet room. "I'm pregnant." The words trembled off her lips, fearful, shaky, filled with disbelief. She didn't take the test yet. She couldn't. But she already knew. Her body knew. Her soul knew. Her heart knew. And the truth hit her with crushing force. She was carrying the child of the man who had planned to have a baby without love, yet had accidentally created a life from the one night they'd opened their hearts to each other. Annabelle sat alone in the staff restroom, the pregnancy test box on her lap shaking with her unsteady breaths. The fluorescent light above her flickered faintly, the quiet hum in the room making her chest tighten even more. 5 days of nausea. A missed cycle. A night she couldn't forget. Her hands trembled as she tore the box open. The wrapper crackled loudly in the silent room. She held the test like it might burn her. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Just breathe." She followed the instructions carefully, methodical, precise, exactly the way she handled trauma cases. Except this time, her heart pounded so fiercely she could barely see straight. She set the test on the counter. Its screen faced away from her. She couldn't look. Not yet. She pressed both palms against the counter and lowered her head. "Please, please don't let this be what I think it is." Seconds passed like minutes. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, she turned the test over. 2 bold lines. Positive. Annabelle's breath hitched so hard it felt like her lungs collapsed. She stumbled backward until she hit the stall door, sliding down to the floor. Her hands covered her mouth as tears blurred her vision. No, she whispered. But the truth stared at her from the small plastic device in her hand. She wasn't imagining things. She wasn't overthinking. She wasn't making assumptions. She was pregnant. With Walter's child. Her head fell forward into her hands as sobs broke through her chest. Not out of anger, out of fear, out of confusion, out of the sudden realization that her life had just changed without warning. "What am I going to do?" she whispered through tears. Her voice trembled. Her entire body trembled. She sat like that for several minutes, curled in the corner, the test, on the tile floor beside her, her world shifting too fast to grasp. Eventually, she wiped her face, inhaled shakily, and picked up the test again. "This isn't just my decision," she whispered. "He deserves to know." But even as she said it, fear crawled through her ribs. What if he thought she was trying to trap him? What if he was disappointed? What if this destroyed everything they'd built? Her mind spiraled with possibilities, each one heavier than the last. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, the slightest instinctive gesture, and felt her breath catch. "This is real," she whispered. "This is happening." And there was only one person in the world she needed to call. Annabelle stepped out of the restroom, slipped into an empty hallway, and leaned against the wall. Her hands shook as she scrolled to Walter's name. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Her heart raced. "Just tell him," she whispered. She pressed call. The dial tone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Annabelle?" Walter's voice came through immediately, warm, steady, familiar. "Is everything okay?" Her throat closed. Tears pricked her eyes again. She tried to breathe. She failed. Her voice cracked. "Walter, I need to tell you something." Concern rushed into his tone. "You sound scared. What happened?" Annabelle covered her mouth for a second, eyes squeezing shut. Her voice trembled when she finally forced the words out. "Walter, I'm pregnant." Silence. Complete, stunned silence. She waited, terrified, for anger, shock, disbelief. Something, but all she heard was his unsteady breathing on the other end. Finally, his voice came, quiet, raw, almost broken. We're having a baby?" "Yes," she whispered. I didn't plan this. I swear I didn't." "Annabelle," he cut in, his voice firm but gentle. "I don't think you planned anything. I believe you." She let out a shaky breath she'd been holding for minutes. Walter inhaled sharply, once, twice, like he was trying to absorb the truth. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Annabelle clenched her eyes shut. "I know this complicates everything, especially with your—" She hesitated. "Your plans. My plans can wait," he said quickly. "Annabelle, listen. I'm shocked, of course I am, but I'm not upset, not even close." Her voice shook. "I can do this alone if I have to. I just needed you to know." Walter's voice cracked in a way she'd never heard before. "You won't have to. I'm not going anywhere." Her knees nearly gave out at those words. "I mean that," he continued. "Every word. I'm here, for you, for the baby, for whatever this means." Annabelle pressed a hand over her heart, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. "Walter." "Yes?" "I'm scared." "I know," he whispered, "but you're not alone. Not anymore." She leaned against the wall, her body finally relaxing for the first time since she'd taken the test. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me for showing up," Walter said. "This is my child too. And I'm going to be here. Just tell me what you need." Annabelle finally let her head fall back against the wall, eyes closing. "I just need you to stay." "I will," Walter promised softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Walter didn't wait a full day. He didn't text first. He didn't ask if she wanted him to come. He simply said, after that life-changing call, "I'm coming to Chicago. Today." Annabelle stood in the hospital parking lot, phone pressed to her ear, eyes widening. "Walter, you don't have to." "I do," he cut in gently. "I want to. This is too important for phone calls." His tone held no hesitation, no overconfidence, just urgency mixed with something steady and protective. Annabelle exhaled shakily. "Okay. I'll call you when I land," he said. "Where should I meet you?" She hesitated. Her home felt too personal. His hotel felt too intimate. She settled on neutral ground. "The lakefront," she whispered. "The spot near the walking path, where we watched the water last time." Walter didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." The air carried a late afternoon chill. Chicago's skyline stood tall behind Annabelle as she hugged her arms. Around herself, watching the water lap gently against the rocks. Cars hummed behind her, joggers passed by, but the world felt strangely quiet. Then she saw him. Walter crossed the pathway, eyes locked on her from the moment he spotted her. His steps quickened as he approached. The wind tugged lightly at his coat, but he barely seemed to notice. When he reached her, he stopped a few feet away, chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. "Annabelle," he said softly. Her eyes flickered up to him, full of fear, exhaustion, and something fragile he couldn't quite name. He stepped closer. "Can I hug you?" he asked, voice gentle. She didn't answer with words. She stepped into him. Walter wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into his chest with a steadiness that made her eyes close immediately. She rested her cheek against his coat, letting herself feel the warmth of him, the solidity, the presence. His hand moved slowly up her back, stopping just between her shoulders. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm overwhelmed," she whispered. "Me too," he said softly. "But we're in this together now." Annabelle pulled back slightly, but he kept his hands at her arms, grounding her. She looked up at him, uncertainty clouding her features. I didn't want this to ruin your plans, she said quietly. The surrogacy, your future, everything. Walter shook his head immediately. Plans can change. People can't be replaced. Annabelle's lips parted. Walter. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You matter more to me than any plan I ever made. Annabelle blinked rapidly, fighting the wave of emotion threatening to break through. I don't want to hold you back, she whispered. You're not holding me back, Walter said. You're the woman carrying my child. That doesn't hold me back. That moves me forward. Her breath trembled. I didn't think you'd react like this. I didn't know how I'd react, Walter admitted. I just knew I had to be here. That's the only thing that made sense. Annabelle turned toward the lake, breathing in the cold air, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Walter stepped beside her, giving her a moment without letting her feel alone. After a long pause, she spoke again. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, Walter said honestly. But we can learn together. She let out a small, broken laugh. You make everything sound easier than it feels. Walter smiled slightly. I'm just choosing you, that's all. Annabelle turned her head slowly, eyes softening with vulnerability. Why? She whispered. His answer was simple. Because Walter had never been one to exaggerate. Because you're the mother of my child, he said, and because I care about you. Both truths matter. Annabelle's lashes fluttered. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. Will you come to my first prenatal appointment? She asked quietly. Walter didn't even blink. Of course, I will. Her lips pressed together to steady themselves. And the others? She asked. All of them, Walter said, his voice firm. Every single one. Annabelle looked away, tears gathering. I don't want you to feel obligated, she murmured. I feel committed, Walter replied. There's a difference. They walked along the water in slow steps, letting the breeze and the moments settle around them. Walter broke the silence first. Have you been feeling okay? Annabelle nodded lightly. A little nauseous, a little tired, a lot scared. Walter's hand brushed her arm gently, not grabbing, just offering wordless reassurance. We'll take it one day at a time. She nodded. He continued. What do you need from me right now? Annabelle thought for a moment. Honesty, consistency, presence. Just be here, she whispered. Walter nodded. Done. Annabelle shook her head. You say that like it's easy. It is, Walter said. Because I want to be here. Her eyes softened. Thank you. They paused at a bench near the water. Walter gestured for her to sit. She hesitated, but eventually lowered herself, rubbing her hands together. Walter sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth, but not so close that she felt trapped. After a while, she asked, What about your company, your schedule, your life? Walter leaned back slightly, watching the waves. My company survived before I met you. It'll survive while I take care of my family. Annabelle blinked. Family? Walter turned to her. Yes, that's what we are now. The word hit Annabelle like a quiet thunderclap. Not loud, not forceful, but undeniable. Family, she repeated softly. Walter nodded. You're not doing this alone, not for a single day. Annabelle finally exhaled, letting her shoulders drop, a small, subtle release of tension she'd been carrying since she took the test. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Walter walked her to her car when it grew colder outside. She unlocked the door, then turned to him. Thank you for coming, she said softly. Walter smiled, a warm, genuine one that reached his eyes. I wouldn't have been anywhere else. She hesitated, then stepped into him for a hug. He wrapped his arms around her again gently, protectively, and this time she didn't shake. She leaned into his chest, letting herself feel held for a moment, letting herself imagine a future that didn't scare her quite as much. Walter rested his chin lightly on her hair. We'll figure everything out, he whispered. Together. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the test, she believed him. The morning of the appointment arrived sooner than either of them expected. Annabelle woke before sunrise, heart pounding harder than it ever had before a surgery shift. She sat at the edge of her bed, palms pressed to her thighs, trying to slow her breathing. He's coming. He's really coming. She wasn't used to people following through, not for emotional things, not for her. A soft vibration broke through her thoughts. Walter, good morning. I'm downstairs whenever you're ready. Annabelle's stomach flipped. He was early. He wasn't just showing up, he was prioritizing her. She took a breath, stood, and headed down. Walter stood outside his car waiting for her, hands in his coat pockets, eyes warming the moment he saw her. "You okay?" he asked. "Trying to be," she admitted. He opened the passenger door for her without a word, not to impress her, but because it was instinctive. Annabelle sat down, and he closed the door gently, circling around to his seat. The air between them was quiet but full. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he said softly, "Thank you for letting me be here." Annabelle looked out the window, then back at him. "You don't have to thank me. It's your child too." Walter glanced at her briefly, then focused back on the road. "It still means something that you want me here." She didn't respond, not because she disagreed, but because the truth of it warmed something inside her she wasn't ready to name. The clinic was busy, but Walter stayed close without hovering. Annabelle filled out paperwork while he stood beside her occasionally, glancing down at her hands as if silently checking she was okay. When they sat, Annabelle fidgeted with her fingers. Walter noticed. "Nervous?" She nodded once. "More than I thought." He reached over slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. His hand covered hers lightly. "You're not doing this alone," he whispered. Her breath caught, subtle but real. "Thank you," she said softly. When the nurse called Annabelle's name, Walter rose with her immediately. The nurse smiled politely, but with a hint of surprise. Most fathers didn't come to the first appointment. Inside the dim sonogram room, Annabelle lay back on the exam table, lifting her shirt slightly as the technician prepared. Walter stood near her head, unsure where his hands should go. He finally settled one hand on the rail of the bed, close to hers. "You okay?" he murmured. "Yes," she whispered. "I think so." The room quieted as the technician placed the cool gel on her abdomen and moved the wand gently across her skin. For a moment, nothing. Just static. Then, a flicker, a rhythmic movement. The technician smiled. "There we go." Walter leaned forward, breath catching. That's your baby," the technician confirmed. Annabelle's eyes softened instantly. Tears she'd been holding back stung her lashes. Walter watched the small image on the screen, his chest tightening with awe. A heartbeat pulsed steadily through the speakers, quick, strong, alive. Annabelle's hand trembled slightly. Walter saw it. Without thinking, he slipped his fingers through hers. She didn't pull away. He whispered, voice thick, "That's our child." Annabelle pressed her lips together to keep them from trembling. "I can't believe this is real." Walter shook his head slowly. "Neither can I." The heartbeat filled the room, steady and powerful. For a few moments they forgot everything. The fear, the uncertainty, the past heartbreaks. All that existed was the sound of the life they had created together. Annabelle walked out of the room with printed sonogram photos in her hand. Walter walked beside her, not touching, but close enough that she felt his warmth. Outside, the sun had risen fully, brushing the parking lot with soft light. Walter turned to her. "Can I take you to breakfast?" Annabelle looked at him, caught off guard. "Breakfast?" He shrugged. "It feels like we should celebrate." Her chest softened. "Okay." They found a quiet diner nearby, one of those local Chicago spots with booths, warm coffee, and soft music. They sat across from each other, the silence comfortable this time. Walter tapped the sonogram image lightly. "Can I keep one?" Annabelle blinked. "You want one?" "Of course," he said. "That's my baby too." Her heart fluttered. She handed him one of the prints carefully. He accepted it as though she were giving him something priceless. He stared at the image for a long moment before tucking it into his wallet, smoothing the edge gently. Annabelle watched him, silently absorbing how different he was from any man she'd known. After a while, she whispered, "You're really going to show up for this, aren't you?" Walter lifted his gaze. "Yes," he said firmly, "every part of it. You won't walk through this alone." Annabelle swallowed, eyes glowing with something warm and fragile. "I'm not used to that," she admitted. Walter leaned forward slightly. "I'll change that." Her breath caught. For a moment, they didn't speak. Then Annabelle whispered something she didn't plan to say. "I'm glad it's you." Walter's eyes softened instantly. "I'm glad it's you too," he replied. The days following their first prenatal appointment settled into a quiet, unexpected rhythm. The kind of rhythm that grows naturally when two people begin relying on each other without meaning to. Walter didn't make grand gestures. He didn't overwhelm her with messages or sudden declarations. He simply showed up, every day, in small, steady ways that spoke louder than anything he could have said. Annabelle finished a long shift one evening and walked into the staff parking lot with her shoulders slumped, her bag hanging loosely from her hand. She wasn't expecting anything except the cold Chicago air and another lonely drive home. But Walter's car headlights flashed quietly from a distance. He stepped out, hands tucked in his coat pockets. "You look exhausted." "I feel it," she admitted. "I thought I'd drive you home," he said gently. "You shouldn't be out here tired and pregnant." Annabelle opened her mouth to argue, instinct, but her heart softened. "Okay," she whispered. She got into the passenger seat, leaning her head back as Walter pulled out of the lot. Soft jazz hummed through the speakers, and for once, the drive home didn't feel heavy. When they reached her apartment, Walter came around and opened her door for her. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." It didn't stop there. Some mornings, he brought her breakfast before her shift. Nothing extravagant, just warm food she didn't have the energy to cook. Some evenings he showed up with ginger tea when nausea made her uneasy. Other times he simply sat with her in her apartment's small living room, talking while she rested with her feet up. There were no fireworks, no declarations, just two people navigating an unexpected chapter together, quietly, gently. One evening, Annabelle looked up from her spot on the couch and whispered, "Walter?" "Yes? You don't need to do all this." Walter turned his head toward her. "Maybe not. But I want to. You shouldn't carry everything alone." She hesitated. "I'm used to doing everything alone." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I'm here." Annabelle's eyes warmed, and a tiny part of her chest loosened, a piece she'd kept locked for years. One afternoon, Walter picked her up after another draining shift. She slid into the back seat, kicking off her shoes and lying down across the seat with a small groan. "That bad?" he asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "Long day," she said. "And long life." Walter let out a quiet breath. "Can I ask you something?" When you think about the baby, how do you feel?" Annabelle stared at the car ceiling, her voice barely above a whisper. Terrified, overwhelmed, grateful. All at once, Walter nodded slowly. "Me too." "You?" she asked, shifting to look at him. He nodded again, terrified and grateful and shocked. "But every day, I'm more certain that I want to be here." Annabelle blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. Walter held her gaze through the mirror. "You and this baby matter to me." She didn't respond immediately. Her throat tightened. Her heart softened. Slowly, she whispered, "You matter to me too." Walter's breath hitched, but he kept driving, letting her words settle deeply, without forcing anything more. One evening, they sat on Annabelle's couch, her legs stretched across a pillow, as Walter massaged her calves gently. "You don't have to do that," she murmured, her eyes half closed. "I know," he said. "But you've been on your feet all day. Let me help." His hands were warm, steady, caring. Annabelle felt herself relax in a way she hadn't in years. She watched him for a moment, the focused look in his eyes, the quiet patience in his touch. "Walter," she whispered. "Yeah? You're good at this." He chuckled softly. "I'm learning." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that only comes when someone's walls lower without them noticing. After a long pause, Walter looked up at her. "Can I ask you something?" Annabelle tilted her head. "Go ahead. Do you trust me?" "Even a little." Annabelle swallowed, her gaze falling to his hands. Then, quietly, honestly, "Yes. More than I want to." Walter's expression softened, relief, warmth, and a quiet joy flickering in his eyes. "You can," he whispered. "I won't hurt you." Her breath trembled. "I'm trying to believe that." "Take your time," he said. "I'll be here." And he meant it. As the evening settled, Annabelle leaned her head back against the couch cushion, eyes heavy. Walter moved closer, not touching, but sitting near her feet so she wouldn't feel alone. After a moment, Annabelle whispered something she didn't expect to say. "Can you stay a little longer?" Walter smiled gently. "As long as you want." She closed her eyes, the weight of the world easing off her shoulders for the first time in days. And in that small, peaceful moment, with Walter watching over her and the baby, she carried. Their connection deepened without a single romantic gesture. It deepened through presence, through care, through quiet understanding, the kind that builds real love. As the weeks passed, Annabelle's life shifted in ways she hadn't expected. Walter didn't just show up, he became part of her routine, not in a controlling way, not in an intrusive way, but with a steady presence that grounded her. Every morning before his meetings, he checked in. Every night, he called to see how she was feeling. On her long shifts, he brought meals. On days she felt overwhelmed, he simply sat with her in gentle silence, the kind of care she hadn't known she was missing. One night, after a difficult evening managing emergencies at the hospital, Annabelle returned home exhausted. She dropped her bag inside the door and stood there, breath shaky, body aching. She thought of calling Walter, not her co-workers, not her family, not anyone from her past. Walter, before she could even reach for her phone, he texted, "Walter, you home? Need anything?" Annabelle let out a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. "Annabelle, how did you know?" "Walter, I can hear it in your texts." Annabelle sank onto the couch, holding the phone to her chest for a moment. She typed, "Just tired." He replied immediately, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Annabelle stared at the message. She didn't ask him to come. She didn't even imply it. But he came anyway, not because she was helpless, but because he cared. 20 minutes later, a soft knock came at her door. Annabelle opened it, and Walter held up a bag of warm food, a bottle of water, and a small blanket he'd grabbed from his place. "You looked drained when you left work," he said quietly. "Thought you might need comfort." Annabelle's throat tightened. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he replied, stepping inside. "Can I come in?" She nodded, eyes soft. They sat together while she ate, Walter giving her space but staying close. Halfway through her meal, Annabelle winced suddenly, one hand flying to her stomach. Walter froze. "What's wrong?" Annabelle took a sharp breath. "A cramp. It's sharp." Walter's heart jumped into his throat. He moved closer, voice trembling slightly. "Are you okay? Is it bad? Talk to me." She breathed carefully, trying to steady herself. "I don't know. It's probably nothing. Just stress." Walter shook his head, trying to control his panic. "You shouldn't ignore that." "Do you want to go to the hospital?" She looked up at him, seeing genuine fear in his eyes. It startled her, not because he cared, but because he cared so deeply. "It's easing," she whispered after a moment. "I think it's okay." Walter still looked unconvinced. "You scared me." She reached for his hand, surprising both of them. "I'm okay." He held her hand, squeezing it lightly. "You and the baby both matter to me more than I thought possible." Annabelle's eyes softened. His fear softened her own. "You're really in this, aren't you?" she whispered. Walter didn't hesitate. "Yes, completely." After the scare eased, Annabelle rested with her head on a pillow while Walter sat beside her, fingers gently tracing circles over the back of her hand. The room was dim, the only light coming from a small lamp on the table. Annabelle watched him quietly for a long moment. The careful way he stayed present, the way he checked on her without smothering, the way he breathed easier only when she did. "Walter," she whispered. He looked down at her. "Yeah?" She hesitated, the words right at the edge of her lips. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" he asked softly. "I don't know," she said. "Someone cold, someone distant, someone who treats this like an obligation." Walter shook his head immediately. "This isn't an obligation. This is my child. And you're—" He paused, searching her face. "You're someone I care about. Deeply." Annabelle's breath caught. She swallowed, eyes glistening. "Why?" she whispered, voice barely audible. "Why do you care this much? We barely knew each other when all this started." Walter leaned forward slightly, brushing a stray curl from her forehead in a delicate motion that made her chest tighten. "Because you let me see you," he said quietly. "The real you. And once you see someone's real heart, it's hard to walk away." Annabelle closed her eyes, her hand tightening in his. She whispered, "Walter." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. For a moment, just one moment, it felt like the world narrowed to the two of them. Annabelle opened her eyes slowly, their faces inches apart. She whispered, "I'm scared of what this could become." Walter breathed out, "I'm scared too." Their noses brushed, a whisper of closeness, a breath away from something more. Then Annabelle exhaled softly and looked away, breaking the moment. Not because she didn't want it, but because she wanted it too much. Walter respected it. He always did. He kissed her forehead gently. Slow, warm, reassuring. Then he whispered, "We'll take this one step at a time. I'm not going anywhere." Annabelle closed her eyes, letting a tear slip quietly. "Neither am I," she whispered back. Days passed in a quiet, unexpected harmony, a rhythm that made both of them believe, even if briefly, that maybe this pregnancy would unfold gently. Annabelle felt lighter, more supported, safer. Walter remained steady at her side, not hovering, not controlling, just present. And for the first time in years, both allowed themselves to breathe. But life has a way of shifting without warning. It started small. One morning, Annabelle stood in her bathroom, brushing her teeth, when a dull ache twisted low in her abdomen. Nothing sharp, nothing alarming, just strange. She pressed a hand to her stomach. "It's fine," she whispered. "Probably normal." She didn't tell Walter. She didn't want to worry him. He already cared so deeply, too deeply, and she didn't want to become a burden. But by the third day, the ache returned, quicker, stronger, enough to steal her breath for a moment. She steadied herself on the edge of the countertop, jaw clenched. "It's just stretching," she told herself. "The baby's growing." Still, she found herself checking her phone every few minutes. Walter texted, "How are you feeling this morning?" Annabelle replied, "Good, just tired." A lie. A small one. A protective one. Despite her message, Walter felt unsettled. A silent intuition. Annabelle usually added a smiley face or a few extra words. Today, she didn't. He debated calling, but didn't want to overwhelm her. Instead, he sent, "Let me know if you need anything today. I'm around." Annabelle stared at the message longer than she should have. Her chest tightened. Her throat felt thick. She typed, "Thank you," but she didn't tell him the truth. That evening at work, Annabelle felt faint for the first time. She gripped the counter in the trauma bay, swallowing down the sudden dizziness. She took a few deep breaths until the room steadied. A colleague asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded quickly. "Just hungry." But when she walked down the hall, the cramping returned, sharper this time. Enough to make her stop mid-stride. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed. "I'll be okay. I just need rest." Right as the cramping intensified, her phone rang. Walter. Annabelle pressed a hand over her abdomen, trying to keep her voice steady as she answered. "Hey," she said softly. Walter caught the strain instantly. "You don't sound right." "I'm fine," she tried. "Annabelle," he said firmly, "tell me the truth." Another cramp hit. Her breath hitched. Walter heard it. What was that? "Just, I'm tired," she whispered. "That didn't sound like tired," Walter said, panic rising in his chest. "I'll be okay," she murmured. "Where are you?" he asked. "At work. Do you need me to come get you?" "No." The word came out too quickly, too tense. Walter stood from his chair immediately, grabbing his keys. "Annabelle, I'm coming." "You don't have to." Her voice broke slightly. Walter froze. "Annabelle, what's wrong?" She pressed a hand to her forehead. "Nothing. I think I need to rest." Walter's voice dropped low. Scared. Determined. "I'm on my way." Annabelle ended the call, forcing herself to straighten. She took a few steps down the hallway. Slow, cautious. She felt warm. Too warm. Her breathing quickened. She reached the nurse's station for support, her fingers trembling against the counter. A sudden sharp pain shot through her abdomen. Her knees buckled. "Annabelle," a nurse called out. She tried to speak. "I'm fine." But the world tilted violently. Her vision blurred. The hallway stretched. Sounds merged into one long echo. Her body collapsed before she could reach for help. The last thing she heard before darkness swallowed her was someone shouting. Her name, distant, terrified, and the rush of footsteps closing in. As Annabelle lost consciousness, her mind drifted into a fog, memories swirling, images flickering. Walter's face, his hand in hers, the sound of their baby's heartbeat, the warmth of his voice the night he said he wasn't going anywhere. Then darkness. The narrator's voice enters, calm, emotional, gripping. And that, bestie, is how a woman who had only ever known independence found herself fighting for two lives at once, and how a man who swore he'd never risk his heart found himself running toward the very love he thought he'd never have. Now let's go back and see how their story reached the brink of losing everything. The night Chicago glittered beneath Walter's penthouse windows, he felt more alone than he had ever felt in his life. From the outside, anyone looking up at the shimmering tower where he lived would assume success lived there. Wealth, comfort, power, confidence. But inside the quiet, dimly lit space, Walter sat slumped on the edge of his leather sofa, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. The man who once dominated boardrooms now struggled to conquer his own thoughts. He ran a tired hand through his hair and exhaled shakily. The silence wrapped around him like a cold blanket. The city hummed beneath him. Horns, distant sirens, Lake Michigan's wind pressing against towering glass, yet inside, everything felt unbearably still. Another failed relationship, another goodbye he didn't see coming, another reminder that no matter how much money he earned, he couldn't buy loyalty, consistency, or genuine love. A glass of untouched bourbon sat on the table beside him, the ice nearly melted. The amber liquid reflected the soft glow of his floor lamp, but Walter hadn't taken a sip. He didn't want to numb anything. He wanted to feel it, all of it, because tonight, for the first time in years, he wasn't running from the truth. He was breaking under it. He leaned back slowly, letting his spine sink into the couch. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. How did I become this man? He whispered to the empty room. The penthouse swallowed his voice, offering no comfort. A messy collection of thoughts stormed his mind. Memories, moments, conversations, all woven into one painful thread. His ex's engagement announcement flashed first, the message that blindsided him months ago. The woman he once thought could be his future had moved on like he was a temporary season. He remembered staring at that message while standing in his office, feeling something collapse inside him. It wasn't me, he told himself. It wasn't the right time. It wasn't meant to be. But deep down, he knew better. She simply didn't choose him, just like the others before her. He rubbed the back of his neck, jaw tightening. He thought of every time he tried harder than he should have, every time he softened himself for someone who couldn't. That see past his status, every time he gave pieces of his heart, quietly hoping someone would hold them gently. But they never did. They liked his success. They liked his name. They liked the life he could give them. But him, the real him, the man under the tailored suits and calm exterior, no one stayed long enough to love that man. He leaned forward again, elbows on his thighs, burying his face in his hands. Fear had become a shadow trailing him everywhere. Fear of emotional investment, fear of being replaced, fear of being abandoned again and again until he had nothing left. He whispered into his palms, "I can't keep doing this." The sentence quivered with the weight of truth. He wasn't built for the revolving door of failing relationships. He wasn't built for half-hearted affection. He wasn't built to keep giving chances to people who only stayed until something shinier came along. Walter lifted his head and stared out at the Chicago skyline. The city lights flickered gently, dancing across the glass. He watched a train glide across the elevated tracks near the river, headlights slicing through the night. People were out there building families, building homes, building real love. Meanwhile, he was here, surrounded by luxury, but unable to build a single meaningful connection that didn't collapse beneath him. His eyes softened as he stared at the city. He wanted something real, something permanent, something he could hold on to, something that wouldn't betray or abandon him, something that wouldn't leave. A family. His chest tightened. For years he had whispered that wish internally, never speaking it aloud. He wanted to be a father, deeply, quietly, desperately. He wanted someone whose life was tied to his, not through heartbreak or chance, but through blood and loyalty. Not a partner, not a relationship, a child, a small, fragile life that depended on him. Someone he could pour his love into without fear they would leave him for someone better. Someone who would know him not as the CEO, not as the wealthy man, but as their father. And he would love that child the way no one had ever loved him. His throat tightened at the thought. He swallowed hard. The decision wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It had been building for months, years even, buried beneath responsibilities, heartbreaks, and the quiet yearning he carried every night. But tonight he finally allowed himself to say the truth. "I want a child." The sentence slipped out shakily, but real, raw, unfiltered. He stood slowly, pacing toward the window. His reflection stared back at him, the tired eyes, the heavy expression, the vulnerability he hid from everyone but himself. "You're alone, Walter," he whispered to his reflection. "But you don't have to stay alone." He placed a hand on the glass, feeling the cool surface beneath his palm. A child wouldn't abandon him. A child wouldn't walk out. A child wouldn't lose interest or find someone else. A child would love him simply because he tried, because he showed up, because he cared. Walter stepped back from the window, inhaling deeply. No more waiting for the perfect partner. No more hoping someone would choose him. No more exhausting emotional risks. He would choose himself. He would choose his future. He would build the family he longed for, alone, if he had to. His heart steadied. "I'm doing this," he said firmly, "on my own terms." The tension in his chest loosened, not joy, not relief, but clarity. For the first time in years, he felt a direction forming beneath the chaos. He walked toward his desk, powering on the sleek computer monitor. The screen lit up the room with a pale glow. He typed slowly into the search bar, "Chicago fertility clinics for single fathers." Dozens of results appeared instantly. Modern facilities, specialized programs, recommended doctors. He clicked through them with a seriousness he rarely applied to personal matters. Each page felt like a step towards something he could finally call his own. A future he controlled. A next chapter that didn't depend on someone else's commitment. He paused on one clinic, Chicago Family Reproductive Center, located near Northwestern Memorial Hospital. One of the top-rated facilities in Illinois. State-of-the-art labs, experienced professionals, excellent reviews. It looked right, safe, solid. He sat up straighter, hovering the mouse over the book consultation button. He could feel the tension building in him, anticipation laced with fear. This wasn't a business decision. This wasn't a financial venture. This was personal, deeply personal. Yet he was determined. His jaw tightened. "This is the next step," he whispered. "For me, for the family I want, for the life I'm choosing." He clicked. Appointment booked. Confirmation sent. His life, unknowingly, shifted at that exact moment. Not because he wanted a child, but because destiny was preparing to give him one in a way he never expected. And she, the woman who would carry that child, wasn't a hired surrogate. She was the woman whose heartbeat would one day stop in a hospital hallway as he screamed her name. But for now, he stood alone in his penthouse, unaware that the decision he made tonight would entangle him with the one person who would become his greatest heartbreak and his greatest love. A city that reflects Walter's loneliness and the path he's walking into. Chicago had always been a city of contrasts, and Walter felt those contrasts deeper now than at any point in his life. Skyscrapers that touched the clouds, neighborhoods alive with families and music, quiet corners that hid deep loneliness. Chicago pulsed with life, but from Walter's penthouse view, it felt like a world moving without him. He needed air. He needed motion. He needed to feel something outside the suffocating walls of his home. So he grabbed his coat, stepped into the private elevator, and rode it down to the ground floor, the quiet hum echoing around him. The moment he stepped out onto East Wacker Drive, the cold air slapped against his face, grounding him. Winter had not fully set in, but the wind coming off the river had its usual Chicago bite. He shoved his hands into his pockets and began walking, letting his feet take him wherever they wanted. He walked down the steps to the Riverwalk, boots clacking softly against concrete. The iconic path stretched alongside the Chicago River, its lights reflecting off the dark green water. Tourists wandered. Couples held hands. Joggers zipped by. Walter walked through all of it feeling like an outsider. He paused at the railing nearest Clark Street Bridge, staring at the water as it rippled beneath the city lights. The iron bridge loomed above, painted its familiar deep red, a symbol of Chicago's industrial spine. He often came here when things got heavy. The water had a way of forcing him to breathe slower, deeper. Tonight, though, nothing eased. The ache in his chest remained. He closed his eyes for a moment and inhaled the crisp air. "This city keeps moving," he whispered, "even when I feel stuck." And it was true. Chicago never paused. Not for heartbreak, not for broken promises, not for loneliness, but something about that constant motion reminded him that life, no matter how painful, kept going. He pushed off the railing and continued walking. Walter made his way up the stairs leading back to street level and crossed onto Michigan Avenue, the magnificent mile. Normally he walked this street with confidence. He had offices not far from here. He knew the shop owners. He'd negotiated deals in the nearby towers. But tonight, he felt misplaced. The street buzzed with life. The glow of street lamps stretched across polished storefronts. People flowed in every direction, chatting, laughing, rushing. He passed Water Tower Place, its tall glass facade reflecting the night sky. Past the old water tower itself, standing strong through history, a symbol of resilience. He paused for a second, staring at the historic stone structure. Resilience, a word he wasn't sure applied to him anymore. He whispered beneath his breath, "You've survived more than this." But part of him didn't fully believe it. Still, he kept walking. His feet eventually guided him toward the Northwestern Hospital campus, a sprawling area of buildings, labs, and research centers. The hospital glowed in the night, windows lit warmly, ambulances pulling in and out, families pacing outside automatic doors. Walter slowed, watching doctors cross the street with coffee cups, nurses in scrubs, chatting on their break, medical staff moving swiftly from one building to another. He imagined a future child running between his legs in the hospital lobby. Imagined himself pacing nervously while sitting in waiting rooms. Imagined being responsible for a tiny life, wholly dependent on him. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a need, a longing. He took a deep breath. From this angle, he could see the tower where the Northwestern Fertility and Reproductive Medicine offices were located, part of the larger medical district known for innovation, support for single parents, and cutting-edge reproductive science. This was the area he'd need to visit soon. This was where his next chapter would begin. The thought gave him both fear and clarity. He looked up at the windows of the fertility center, glowing like soft lanterns in the evening sky. "I'm really doing this," he whispered to himself. He wasn't convincing anyone else. He was convincing himself. The next day, he drove to the clinic he'd researched the night before. Chicago Family Reproductive Center, located on West Huron Street, just a short walk from Northwestern. A clean, modern building with large windows and a calm blue sign out front. Inside, the lobby had warm lighting, soft seating, and quiet music that drifted gently through the air. It felt less like a medical facility and more like a place meant to help people breathe. The receptionist looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Walter cleared his throat. "I have a consultation. Name?" "Walter Hale." His name sounded foreign on his own tongue, softer, more uncertain than usual. "Please have a seat. The doctor will be with you shortly." He nodded, taking a seat in the corner. As he waited, he glanced around. Couples held hands. Women whispered into phones. A few men sat alone like him, hopeful, nervous, unsure. A man with a wedding ring sat beside a pregnant wife. Another man held a folder full of lab results, tapping his foot nervously. Walter looked at them all and felt something shift. He wasn't the only one wanting a family. He wasn't alone in this journey. People of every background, every age, every status came here searching for the same thing: hope. After the appointment, Walter didn't rush home. Instead, he walked. Down Erie Street, past Loyola medical buildings, past coffee shops filled with students and young professionals, past families pushing strollers along the sidewalks. Everything around him reminded him of life, of connection, of future possibilities, of moments that couldn't be bought. A father lifting his toddler onto his shoulders, a mother tying her son's shoelaces, a couple pushing a stroller with a sleepy baby inside. Each image tightened something in Walter's chest. "I want that," he whispered under his breath. A family, a child, someone to come home to. Chicago's rhythm beat steadily around him, trains rattling on the tracks, buses hissing as they stopped, people crossing sidewalks in waves. The city wasn't quiet, but Walter's loneliness echoed even louder. He eventually ended up at Millennium Park, standing at the edge of the Great Lawn. Families scattered across picnic blankets, some tossing frisbees, others snapping photos. He stared at Cloudgate, the massive reflective structure everyone called the Bean. It mirrored the entire skyline behind him. Tall towers, the blue sky, people moving around. He walked toward its smooth surface and saw himself reflected, a distorted version, stretched by curves and angles. He stood still, staring at his reflection. A man who had everything except the one thing he wanted most. Someone walked by pushing a stroller, and Walter's eyes flicked toward them instinctively. The baby inside cooed softly, reaching out a tiny hand toward the mirrored sculpture. Walter swallowed hard. He lifted his hand to the metal surface and let his fingers hover an inch away. At that moment, he made a quiet promise to himself. I'm going to be a father. No matter how alone I feel right now, I won't let fear stop me. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath the sadness, something small and determined began to form. Hope. When Walter returned to his penthouse that evening, Chicago's lights flickered below him again. But the silence didn't suffocate him this time. His decision was made. His path was chosen. The city had shown him clarity, not through words, but through life happening all around him. He knew now where he belonged. He wasn't just a broken man trying to heal. He was a man moving towards something greater, a future he would build with or without anyone beside him. He walked toward his window, staring out at the glowing horizon. This is the beginning, he murmured. And it was. Very soon Chicago would lead him to the woman who would change his life forever. Not in the way he planned, not in the way he expected, but in the way fate had written long before he realized it. The next morning arrived with gray skies pressing low over Chicago, the kind that made the entire city feel heavier than usual. From the window of his penthouse, Walter watched the clouds creep across the skyline, dragging the mood of the day downward with them. He stood barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, coffee untouched in his hand. His eyes weren't on the city. They were on his own reflection in the glass. A man holding himself together by habit, not strength. Last night's clarity still clung to him, but the pain underneath hadn't magically disappeared. It wouldn't, not after years of failed attempts at love, years of offering up a heart no one had the capacity or courage to hold. Today, he wasn't waiting on anyone. Today, he acted. He set the coffee down, grabbed his phone, and took a slow, steadying breath. No hesitation. He searched for the clinic he'd chosen after hours of research. Chicago Family Reproductive Center. Modern, reputable, supportive of single-parent fertility paths. When the call connected, Walter straightened his posture. A calm receptionist answered, "Good morning, Chicago Family Reproductive Center. How may I help you?" His voice came out lower than usual, guarded but steady. "My name is Walter Hale. I'd like to schedule a consultation for fertility services." The line clicked in quiet processing. "Of course, Mr. Hale. Are you exploring the single-parent route or partner-based options?" Walter tightened his grip on the phone. Single-parent. The words tasted metallic. Final. Irreversible. But necessary. "Absolutely," the receptionist said kindly. "We support many single parents. Let me check our availability." He stepped away from the window, pacing slowly across the living room. The penthouse was silent, except for the soft hum of the HVAC system. "Mr. Hale," the receptionist said, "we have an opening Tuesday at 9 a.m. with Dr. Ramirez, one of our senior fertility specialists." Walter's voice didn't waver. "I'll take it." "Perfect. I'll send the intake forms to your email." He ended the call and stood still in the center of his home, chest rising and falling steadily. He'd made the first move, the kind of move that didn't care about heartbreak, romance, or the ghosts of his past. He pressed a hand to his sternum, exhaling. "This is happening," he whispered to the empty room. Not out of excitement, not out of hope, out of necessity. He spent the afternoon reviewing the clinic's intake forms, pages asking about medical history, family genetics, lifestyle habits. He filled them out thoroughly, meticulously, but it was the final page that made him pause. "What brings you to pursue parenthood through fertility assistance?" His jaw clenched. He typed slowly. "Because I want to build a family without relying on people who leave." He didn't erase it. He didn't soften it. He didn't lie. It was the truth of a man who had been disappointed one too many times. When he hit submit, something inside him shifted, a cold, quiet sense of control he hadn't felt in years. He walked to his kitchen, poured out the cold coffee, and grabbed bottled water instead. The simplest act, but it grounded him. He wasn't letting heartbreak steer his life anymore. Today, He'd chosen certainty. Later, he drove through River North, the neighborhood buzzing with its usual life. Restaurants setting up early meals, taxis honking, office workers weaving through sidewalks with caffeine and urgency. Yet everything felt distant. He parked near Ohio Street, stepped out, and let the city sounds wash over him. Chicago often reflected his moods without trying. Buildings stood tall, but the wind cut sharp between them, just like Walter stood tall but felt cold inside. He walked toward the clinic building to get a feel for the location before his actual appointment. He wanted to see the waiting room again, the staff, the space. He was a planner. And emotionally bruised planners didn't like surprises. The glass doors glided open with a soft hush. The receptionist recognized him. "Mr. Hale, you're early." "I know," he replied calmly. "I wanted to familiarize myself with the place." "Of course." "You're welcome to look around." He nodded and walked slowly through the lobby. Neutral-colored walls, soft lighting, comfortable seating, a subtle scent of lavender. Everything intentionally designed to ease anxiety, but it didn't reach him, not yet. He passed by walls showcasing photos of babies born through the clinic, programs, smiling faces, happy families, thank you notes framed neatly. He paused at one photo, a single father holding twin newborns, exhaustion and joy mixing across his face. Walter didn't smile, but his expression softened. "This could be me," he whispered. Not to the babies, not to the father, to himself. A nurse walked by and nodded politely. "You must be Mr. Hale. Dr. Ramirez mentioned your appointment Tuesday." Walter matched her politeness. "Yes, he's excellent," she said. "You'll be in good hands." Walter wasn't used to being reassured, but something about her tone, matter of fact, not pitying, actually helped. He nodded. "Thank you." She smiled and continued down the hall. Walter stood there a moment longer, letting the clinic's environment settle into his mind. This was real. The process was real. The decision was real. He wasn't backing out. As Walter left the clinic, the wind picked up, pushing his coat against him. He buttoned it fully, jaw clenched, eyes forward. Anyone watching him walk down the street would assume confidence, power, calm control. But inside, he felt like a man carrying a fragile mix of determination and old wounds. He wasn't doing this to fill a void. He wasn't doing this to prove anything. He wasn't doing this because he couldn't find love. He was doing this because his past taught him one hard truth. People could love you today and leave you tomorrow. But a child was different. A child was a commitment that didn't rely on romantic stability. A child was a bond he could hold on to. A child was a chance to leave something meaningful in this world. A chance to be the father he wished he'd had. A chance to start fresh. A chance to rewrite his lineage. Walter whispered to himself as he reached his car. No more heartbreak. No more hoping someone stays. This time, I choose my own future. Back home, the penthouse didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt like a place waiting for change. Walter stood in the living room, staring at the space where a crib might go, where tiny shoes might someday clutter the floor, where laughter might echo louder than silence. He wasn't smiling, but his face wasn't weighed down in despair either. He was preparing. He was shifting. He was building something he didn't fully understand yet, but needed deeply. He sat on the edge of his couch, elbows on his knees, breathing steadily. "Tuesday," he whispered. "This is the beginning." Little did he know. The child he longed for wouldn't come from cold medical forms or genetic matching. It would come from a woman whose heart would collide with his in a jazz lounge on a lonely Chicago night. A woman he hadn't met yet. A woman named Annabelle. A woman who would carry his future in ways that neither of them could have predicted, controlled, or planned. In that penthouse, sitting alone with a decision he thought was his own, Walter had no idea. His future had already begun moving toward him. The morning of Walter's fertility appointment arrived wrapped in a quiet layer of Chicago gray. The sky hung heavy over the city, pressing low against the skyline as if mirroring the weight pressing into his chest. He drove through River North in silence, the hum of the engine steady beneath his thoughts. No music, no distractions, no second-guessing. Today was about clarity, control, direction. He wasn't here for love, not for connection, not for emotional messes that could derail him from the path he'd fought to choose. Today, he was here for one purpose, A child. His child. A family that no partner could abandon. He parked in the underground garage beneath the Chicago Family Reproductive Center, stepped out of his car, and adjusted the collar of his black coat. The winter air stung the moment he surfaced from the stairwell, blowing across the small courtyard leading to the clinic's glass entrance. He exhaled once, long and slow, before pushing the door open. Inside, the clinic was warmly lit, intentionally calm. Beige walls, wood accents, soft instrumental music floating in the background. Everything designed to make people feel safe. But Walter wasn't here for comfort. He was here to get answers, to start the process, to solidify a future no one could take from him. He approached the front desk. The woman behind the counter smiled with trained warmth. "Good morning. Name?" "Walter Hale," he said, voice steady, expression reserved. "Welcome, Mr. Hale. You're checked in with Dr. Ramirez. Please take a seat." He nodded and moved to the far corner of the waiting room, choosing the most isolated chair. He didn't want conversation with other patients. He didn't want curious eyes. He wanted this to be quick. He sat stiffly, adjusting his coat around him. His mind raced, though his body stayed perfectly still. This is the right decision. No more heartache. No more disappointment. No more people leaving. He rested his clasped hands between his knees, forcing the thoughts down. He was here because he refused to let fear dictate his future any longer. He was here because he intended to control what he could. He was here because he had cut off every avenue of vulnerability, every crack through which affection had once slipped in. His life was a fortress now. Secure, structured, predictable, or so he believed. A nurse stepped out of the hallway and called another patient's name. A couple stood, hands intertwined. The woman wore a nervous smile. The man squeezed her fingers, whispering something meant to reassure her. Walter watched them for a moment, jaw tight. He wasn't here for that. He didn't want romantic hope. He didn't want shared vulnerability. He wanted the one thing that made sense, a child who wouldn't leave. He shifted in his seat and looked at the framed posters on the wall, photos of newborns wrapped in, pastel blankets, doctors smiling beside new parents, success stories highlighted in large fonts. Words like, "Our miracle," "Worth every step," "Love at first sight." Walter looked away. He wasn't here for miracles. He wasn't here for love. He was here for certainty. His jaw tightened again. But under that tightness, a truth pulsed. He was lonely. Deeply. Quietly. Completely. Yet he felt safer trusting medicine than trusting another person. Safer building a family from logic than from emotion. He leaned his head back against the wall. "Just stay focused," he whispered. When the nurse finally called, "Mr. Hale?" Walter stood immediately, posture crisp, controlled. He followed her down the hallway, sterile floors, muted colors, soft lighting, designed to soothe anxious parents. But Walter wasn't anxious. He was resolved. He answered questions efficiently as she guided him into a consultation room. Any recent illnesses? No. Any major medical history? No. Any medication? No. The nurse typed quickly, nodding. "How are you feeling today?" Walter lifted an eyebrow slightly. "Ready to begin." No emotion. No hesitation. She smiled politely. "Dr. Ramirez will be with you shortly." When she left, Walter sat in the chair, hands folded, leg bouncing once before he forced it still. He wanted nothing to distract him from this process. Not memories, not emotions, not the echo of a woman's voice in a jazz lounge months ago, not the memory of a burgundy dress, not the warmth of a stranger's laughter, not her. He clenched his jaw. Not her, not the night he still thought about, not the eyes that held a hurt that mirrored his own. He had convinced himself that she was gone for good. A moment in time, a mistake he'd cherished in the quiet. But not part of this, not today. Today was about control. Zero complications. Zero emotion. Zero vulnerability. He repeated that mantra silently. A soft knock interrupted him. Dr. Ramirez entered with a warm handshake and a calm voice. "Walter, good to meet you. Let's talk about your goals." Walter nodded, posture straight. "I want to begin the process as soon as possible." "No partner involved?" "No." "Understood," Dr. Ramirez said, pulling up charts. "We can discuss donor options, testing timelines, sperm analysis, and legal guidelines for single-parent procedures." Walter listened with cold focus, absorbing every detail. He didn't flinch, didn't soften, didn't hesitate. He was steel. And yet, unknown to him, on the other side of that building, somewhere in the same hallway, Annabelle Morris was walking into her shift, carrying Walter's child, carrying the future he thought he was planning alone, carrying the life he believed he needed science to create. He wanted zero complications, but fate was already arranging the biggest one he'd ever face. Dr. Ramirez continued, "Once we complete your preliminary testing, we'll—" A quiet alert pinged on the office tablet. A clinic-wide notification, shift assignments, room registrations, staffing adjustments. Walter didn't look at it, but if he had glanced at the screen for even 2 seconds, he would have seen a familiar name. Dr. Annabelle Morris, Trauma and OB Collaboration Assignment, Room 2C, the name that changed his life, the woman he thought he'd never see again, the woman carrying the child he didn't know he already had. But for now he sat stiffly, determinedly, believing everything was in his control, believing he could build a family without emotion, without risk, without getting hurt. He had no idea the emotional storm walking right toward him. He had no idea he was minutes away from colliding with fate. Dr. Ramirez scribbled notes. Walter nodded resolutely. The door remained closed, but just down the hallway, a pair of footsteps approached. Soft, unhurried, familiar in a way his soul recognized before his mind ever would. Annabelle was coming. Annabelle didn't plan to be at the clinic today. She wasn't scheduled for rounds here. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the fertility wing. But the hospital had been overloaded all morning, short-staffed in 2 departments, and her supervisor sent her as backup for a collaborative consult. It was routine, nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, or so she believed. She walked down the quiet hallway, white coat swaying with every step, clipboard in hand, her ID badge brushing gently against her chest. Her breathing felt steady, her focus sharp. She had trained herself to stay composed, no matter what, especially now, carrying a child she wasn't ready to talk about, a child whose father she hadn't seen in weeks, a child she still hadn't told the full truth to. She pushed the thought aside. She had a job to do, a shift to complete. Her footsteps echoed softly as she turned the corner toward consultation. Room 3, the room she'd been assigned to assess equipment updates for. She wasn't expecting anyone inside. She wasn't expecting anything unusual. She wasn't expecting Walter. Not today. Not here. Not like this. The door was cracked open slightly. Annabelle lifted her hand to knock lightly, but the moment she pushed it open another inch, her body froze. The room wasn't empty. Walter Hale sat inside, back straight, suit immaculate, expression composed in that calm, cold way she remembered him having when he tried to hide stress. Her breath caught painfully in her throat. She gripped the doorframe to keep herself steady. A rush, sharp, overwhelming, slammed into her chest. Memories she had worked weeks to compartmentalize came crashing through her mind. His laugh that night in the lounge, the softness of his hands when he held her, the warmth of his voice whispering against her skin, the morning she slipped out of the hotel room, the call where she told him she was pregnant, the way he showed up for her and the baby, the quiet moments where they almost said more than they should, the nights he sat beside her so she wouldn't feel alone, the pain she tried to hide, the fear she carried silently, his promise that he wasn't going anywhere. And there he was, in this room, sitting in this clinic, the same clinic where single parents came to build families. Her heart stuttered. He wasn't here by accident. He was here because of the plan he made before he ever met her, before their night, before the baby, before everything. Annabelle's fingers tightened around the clipboard. She felt dizzy for a moment. She whispered his name before she could stop herself. Walter. Walter had been listening to Dr. Ramirez outline the next procedural step when he heard the soft click of the door. The moment he glanced up and saw her, his entire body went still, completely still. Annabelle, standing in the doorway like something pulled straight out of a memory he never fully let go of. His breath left him in one sharp, silent exhale. He blinked once, then again, as if unsure she was real. Her hair pulled back neatly, her coat crisp and professional, her expression a mixture of shock, fear, and something deeper, something he recognized instantly. Emotion she couldn't hide. For the first time since entering the clinic, Walter felt his heartbeat stumble. He whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Annabelle." His voice cracked in a way he hadn't allowed in years. And in that single moment, the cold emotional distance he tried so hard to maintain shattered like thin glass. Dr. Ramirez looked between them, sensing the sudden shift. "You two know each other?" Annabelle's throat tightened. She forced her voice to work. Yes. We've met before." Walter stood from his chair, but only halfway. He didn't take a step toward her. He didn't speak again. He simply stared, eyes searching her face with a mixture of disbelief and emotion he couldn't hide. Annabelle felt the walls around her chest tighten. This moment wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Not here. Not when she was trying her hardest to stay composed. She swallowed hard and straightened her coat. I didn't realize anyone was inside," she said. "I was sent to check the equipment in this room." Her voice sounded too formal, too controlled, too distant. Walter noticed that immediately. He cleared his throat. "I didn't know you worked in this wing." "I don't," she replied quickly. "Just helping today." Dr. Ramirez nodded. "Well, we're just finishing up." Annabelle stepped into the room, posture stiff, face carefully blank. Walter watched her move. Her walk. Her breathing. The faint curve of her stomach, not visible yet, but he knew. He knew what she carried. He knew every emotion tied to it. And she knew, he knew. The tension became unbearable. As Annabelle crossed to the counter to check the oxygen lines, she felt Walter's eyes following her, heavy, conflicted, confused. The night they shared resurfaced in full detail for her. The way his hands held her gently. The soft kiss he pressed to her forehead. The whispered conversations that stretched until dawn. The warmth of his heartbeat beneath her ear. She tried to steady her breathing. This wasn't the time for memories. This wasn't the place for emotion. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrote something on her clipboard. Walter noticed. He always noticed. He stepped forward slightly, voice low. "Annabelle, look at me." She stiffened. She didn't turn. She didn't breathe. "Annabelle," he said again, softer this time. She closed her eyes. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she turned her head. Their eyes met. His were full of questions he didn't know how to ask. Hers were full of answers she didn't know how to give. The room grew still. Dr. Ramirez, sensing that this had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with something deeper, cleared his throat gently. "I'll give you both a moment," he said before stepping outside. The door clicked shut. And suddenly, it was just the two of them, alone, facing the moment fate carefully orchestrated. Walter inhaled deeply. "You didn't tell me you work here." Annabelle kept her voice even. "You didn't tell me you were coming here." His jaw flexed, subtle but telling. "I didn't want any complications," he said quietly. Her eyes flickered. A small, brittle ache pierced her chest. "You call me a complication?" He shook his head quickly. "No. That's not, Annabelle, that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Her voice was soft but firm. Walter opened his mouth and closed it again. He looked away. Annabelle's heart pulled painfully. He wasn't cold. He wasn't aloof. He wasn't indifferent. He was scared. She recognized that fear. She'd heard it in his voice the day she told him she was pregnant. But here, in this clinic, sitting in this room, it made everything complicated in a way neither had prepared for. She stepped back, creating physical space, not because she wanted distance, but because she needed clarity. "Walter," she whispered, "why are you here today?" He hesitated. His jaw clenched again. He swallowed. "I had this appointment booked before." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Annabelle's chest tightened. Before the lounge. Before the night. Before the baby growing inside her. She nodded once, small but full of emotion. "And you still came, even after everything?" Walter's eyes darkened with conflict. "Yes." The honesty hit her like a quiet blow, not because she was surprised, he always meant what he said, but because it revealed a truth she wasn't ready to face. He was still trying to build the life he planned before her. Before the baby. Before the fragile connection between them. Annabelle's voice softened, trembling slightly. "I see." Walter took a slow step toward her. "It's not what you think." Her eyes lifted sharply. "Then tell me what it is." He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, A soft knock hit the door. A nurse's voice called from the hallway. "Dr. Morris? They need you in 2 billions. Annabelle exhaled quietly, relief and heartbreak braided together. "I have to go," she said. Walter took another small step before stopping himself. "You can't leave like this." "I don't have a choice," she whispered. Her hand brushed the door handle. She looked back at him, one last glance that carried more emotion than either of them could admit. Then she stepped out. The door closed between them. Not loudly, not harshly, just quietly enough to hurt. Annabelle left the room with her clipboard pressed tightly against her chest, her pulse racing in a way she hadn't felt since she first told Walter she was pregnant. Walking down that hallway, she forced herself to breathe evenly. Professional, calm, controlled. She needed to stay in that lane. But inside, her emotions spun wildly. Why was he here? Why now? Why did fate put them inside the same room at the exact same moment? Her footsteps echoed lightly as she entered room 2B, forcing her expression into perfect neutrality. "Good morning,"